Will the Committee on Budget and Housing, Sustainability and Health please come to order? I would like to welcome, it is April 30, 2024, Tuesday at 9:34 a.m. And I would like to welcome the committee budget members, which includes my committee Vice Chair Wire, followed by Councilmember Kia Aina, Councilmember Tolba, and Councilmember Say. And I would also like to welcome Councilmember Tupola.
Mahalo, Chair. And for the Committee on Housing, Sustainability, and Health, we do have Vice Chair Kia Aina present with Councilmember Toba. I believe Councilmember Okimoto is on her way, and Councilmember Dos Santos Tam is excused from today's meeting. I don't see him online. If any council members participating remotely, which I don't believe we have at the moment, but if anyone joins later in accordance with Section 92-3.7 Hawaii Revised Statutes, please identify each person is with them at their location. Pursuant to Section 92-3.7 Hawaii Revised Statutes, this meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony on all items on the agenda in two ways: remotely and in person in the council chamber. Remote and in-person oral testimony will be allowed when the agenda item is taken up. Before testifying, each person shall state their name. Each speaker may not have anyone else read their statement and is limited to a 1-minute presentation on each item. All persons who have registered to testify remotely by video conference will be called upon first. When your name is called, please monitor your screen and activate your audio feed when prompted. We'll then give persons who have not registered an opportunity to offer testimony. Please utilize the raise hand feature in Zoom to be called on. For those joining us by telephone only, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. We'll identify you by the last 3 digits of your phone number. And when your number is called, please press *6 to unmute yourself when prompted. Some friendly reminders and tips. Video conference from a quiet location if possible. If you're also watching the proceedings on Honolulu, please mute your television at the time you're called to testify. When the timer on the screen reaches 0, please conclude your remarks promptly. Once all the remote testifiers have testified, we'll proceed to in-person testimony in the council chamber. Persons who have not registered will be given an opportunity to speak following the oral testimonies of the registered speakers. For those council members participating from outside the council chamber in accordance with HR Section 92-3.7, the meeting will automatically recess if we lose audiovisual contact with you and cannot reconvene until we reestablish contact. Therefore, please announce beforehand if you'll be voluntarily signing out of the meeting. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, will be available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones during the course of the meeting.
We will start with our first agenda item, and we have 2 agenda items which are informational briefings. But our first item is a status update regarding the appropriations for capital projects relating to affordable housing and homelessness as required by Resolution 24-52 FD1. With us from the administration, we will begin with the Mayor's Office of Housing, the Executive Director, Denise Iseri Matsubara. Members, there is a presentation from the administration that is under Mayor's Message 76. I will allow for the Office of Housing Executive Director to lead the presentation and then allow for the rest of the presentations by the departments to occur. And then we'll begin with questions for the city administration after all the presentations are PAL. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mrs. Seri Matsubara.
Thank you very much. Aloha and good morning, Budget Chair Cordero, Housing Chair Wire, and members of this joint committee. Denise Iseri Matsubara, Executive Director for the Office of Housing. Thank you for the opportunity to report on the status of capital appropriations in the fiscal year 23-24 CIP budget relating to affordable housing and homelessness. Let us begin by expressing our strong appreciation for the support from the City Council for making housing and homelessness a priority in the budget. None of the CIP funds were appropriated to the Office of Housing. Our role was to assemble today's PowerPoint and coordinate the departments to prepare for this presentation today. Each department director or deputy will be reporting on the status of the appropriation in their respective budgets, with the exception of DDC, which I understand is treated a little bit differently. So for the Office of Housing, it will be me covering private activity bonds, Deputy Kevin Auger covering infrastructure appropriations to DDC. However, DDC Director Millis is also here to answer questions. Director Kawano from Budget and Fiscal Services will cover CDBG. Deputy Director Los Baños will cover appropriations to DCS. Director Tashner will cover appropriations to DLM. Unfortunately, Director Takeuchi Apuna was unable to attend the meeting this morning, so I will do my best to cover appropriations to DPP for Bill 1, Bill 7, or Chapter 32 projects, and defer questions from the Council to DPP. So in the interest of time, as Chair said, I take that back. DPP Director is here. In the interest of time, like Chair said, we will run through the entire PowerPoint, then take questions and comments after we've completed the presentation. First up, we have the Affordable Housing Funds, which fell under DCS in fiscal year 23. The fiscal year 24 funds and responsibility for administration of the program was transferred to DLM in January of this year. HOU has been assisting DLM with the realignment of the program. So at this time, I'd like to turn the things over to Deputy Los Baños.
Aloha and good morning. Edward Los Baños, Deputy Director, Department of Community Services. Again, thank you for the Council for the tremendous support for affordable housing and homelessness services and programs and facilities that we're recovering today. As Denise mentioned, we're starting off with the Affordable Housing Fund. So on your first slide, what you'll see is that the tail end of our fiscal year 2022 solicitation. In 2022, DCS started off by trying to expend through a solicitation or public offering to developers what had accumulated in the funds, which is about $37 million. So in fiscal year 22, out of that pocket of money, we did contract $16.7 million from those prior sources. And what we see here in fiscal year 23 on this slide is the remaining $6.3 million, or the tail end. The $6 million going to Halewiliko over in Aiea, as well as Wailua Mill Camp. You know, and overall, we saw the solicitation as a great success for the program. You know, for its first offering, to kind of get the results that we received, we did receive over $50 million in applications. We did proceed with $27.8 million in awards of these funds. But it was a great first offering. I want to thank Corporation Council as well as Budget and Fiscal Services for their support. You know, launching new things at the city is difficult, you know, but so seeing something from vision to actual realization has been really great. Halewiliko is a project where groundbreaking has occurred and where they're moving forward on going vertical. So with all those projects, we hope to see new affordable housing units coming online soon. But otherwise, in fiscal year 23, as you see here, we made great progress on spending down those funds. Before I hand it over to Director Tashner, I do want to share that DCS believes that the Affordable Housing Fund, when he did the OIC in January that Denise just talked about, is in great hands. You know, it's always a partnership here. I think the mayor's put together a great team on this. And Director Tashner was also involved in our fiscal year 2022 solicitation as an evaluator and helped with the formulation of that. So do want to thank her, and we do believe the program's in great hands.
Good morning, Kat Tashner, Department of Land Management. As the Deputy Director Los Banos mentioned, the transfer of the Affordable Housing Fund was moved over to the Department of Land Management together with the Office of Housing. For administration, we have prepared a new solicitation for the remainder of the fund to go out. It has been submitted. I expect it'll go out either at the end of this fiscal year, at the very beginning of the next fiscal year, so either late June, early July, and that will be for the amount of just about $8 million. We hope we'll see as much success with the applicants as we did with the last solicitation. Moving on to the next two appropriations, affordable housing with TOD area preference. There was a fiscal year 23 and a fiscal year 24 appropriation. To date, there are no planned projects, and that's due largely to the fact that we've been focusing on expending the monies that were appropriated through the fiscal year 24 appropriation for affordable housing. We're very grateful to the council for working with us to amend the language to give us more flexibility, and because of that, we were able to use it successfully to acquire the Iwilei Center. $41 million was expended towards that end, and that will trigger several planned projects in the Iwilei area, which include additional acquisitions to really activate the area, relocation, which is federally mandated assistance to be provided to the existing tenants of the Iwilei Center. And there are several other projects where we are hoping to expend funds to support affordable housing, which include Anna Road, Waikiki Vista, which was an acquisition that the city completed several years ago, Royal Kunia, the Boxcar Lot, and as well as Verona Villages. Although that has been transferred to a developer, the city wants to continue to support that project, and so we're looking for ways that we can use that appropriation towards that end. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to the Department of Community Services for a discussion on the Community Revitalization Initiative funds.
So aloha, Edward Los Banos, Deputy Director, Department of Community Services. So we do want to thank the council for their support of DCS and providing us with resources to execute our mission through a broad support and additional funding that we received to the community revitalization funds. The overlap of community revitalization appropriation as well as homeless service facilities, which I'll cover later, a little bit later, a couple of slides down the road here, caused us to reevaluate our approach on spending all of this funding that we have, or just evaluate and strategize on how to deploy these funds. But I also share that another challenge that DCS faced was that it was been very successful in applying and receiving congressional earmarks. That's not a part of this presentation, but it's a creative way that kind of speaks to DCS's DNA on trying to attract other funds without going after city funds. While we appreciate the support. So you're well aware of the $2.7 million that we received for Domestic Violence Action Center. They're actively in the process. This is the one contract from the congressional earmarks that we've actually got through contracting on, but they're out shopping for a new residence for survivors of domestic violence. This is an example of a project that would have otherwise been spent through one of these funds. But otherwise, in contracting right now, how we would have used community revitalization or some of these homeless funds that you've provided us through congressional earmarks from Senator Schatz Hirono case in our Tokuda, our DC delegation. We are contracting right now with HUD on $3.5 million for mental health housing and services, $11.9 million towards alternative housing, or also known as kauhale or tiny homes, as well as $2.5 million towards realizing the Aging and Disability Resource Center, or Kupuna Resource Center, for our Elderly Affairs Division. But at the end, the city has great programs, and as a result, we're able to attract and fund these kinds of resources and programs in partnership with state and federal partners. But we're also looking to expand this to philanthropy. As we invest in CIP, the CIP that you've appropriated to DCS, at the top of my mind always is how the city will be able to sustain these resources and investments moving forward. So how do we keep the lights on in these buildings? How do we keep these programs going without adverse impact to our operating budget? So with regard to community revitalization, knowing that we have a good amount of funds from homeless service facilities that was OIC to us from Department of Land Management, it kind of made us focus more so on our other programs that don't focus on homeless services, for example. So I'd like to look at the two projects together, right? So let's see what slide's up here. Yeah, the previous slide had $3 million, and then this one has $18 million. Kind of look at them together, but we do have plans for them. Other than a portion of it was used towards the EVLA center acquisition, but we are looking at spending, allocating as much as $1 million of it for the Cunha boxcar lot and the planned preschool or childcare center that was cited there. We are looking at $130,000 towards the EVLA Resource Center. And this is our recent partnership with the Department of Health for mental health resources and their crisis and triage center. So again, not purely a homeless project, but more that mental health services, more in that range there. But that was a big one for us, unprecedented, working with the Department of Health in recognition that mental health is a big part of our homeless solution here. And being one of our first projects with the Department of Health focusing on that was a big amount of progress for DCS. We're also looking at this community revitalization fund to potentially fund reopen the public restrooms in Pauahihale. What we get in Chinatown is a very popular area to visit, but no public restrooms are available. And then finally, under community revitalization, we're looking at prospective, any possible improvements that might be qualified for the Royal Hawaiian Band over at Waikiki Vista as they enter into their new home. Next, when you look at affordable housing for homeless, we are making there was a generous appropriation here. We are looking at making improvements to Pauahihale. Pauahihale Mental Health Kukua recently moved out. We're looking at renovating that location, and we've been working with a contractor. I do have a design bid proposal from Pai Paiola, a nonprofit that's going to specialize in these kind of communities to create a vertical kauhale or in partnership with the state. So this is something where we're going to invest your CIP funds on and look for operating funds from the state, and this is an initiative that is moving forward with Homeless Coordinator John Mizuno on the state side. The next two items on the list Waikiki Vista for homeless services and service facilities and affordable housing for homeless. So we recently opened up Waikiki Vista. I think we have more than a handful of families there right now, even though it's only been open for just over a couple weeks now. And what we're looking to do is work with a planning and design firm to intentionally create a family assessment center, that type of program over there in Waikiki Vista. Adaptive reuse is great. It creates an opportunity in the near term. But this administration is committed to having a portion of Waikiki Vista committed to homeless or those with extremely very low income, less than 30% EMI. We're looking for opportunities like that to intentionally design a space for programs to be successful and for folks to thrive in. So adaptive reuse is great. It puts us in service immediately, but we're looking at something more that will have a more lasting impact on the families. I'll give you an example. So with our family assessment center program we have at Waikiki Vista, we've allotted them 4 of the 9 residential floors. And one of the feedback we got is, hey, Edward, if I do this at this site and I have to run security for my tenants or my clients and these things, the security guard has got to go up and down 4 floors. If you're familiar with Waikiki Vista, the building has a pedestal and it kind of gets narrower on the top. We could probably easily kind of pour those rooms or a similar type of volume into one of those classroom floors instead and kind of make it more of an efficient program to run where it's all on one floor rather than separated over the course of 4 floors, even though they're adjacent. So there's some intentional design we can work through there and create a meaningful space for these families that we're looking to service at Waikiki Vista. We also have other investments we're looking to make at Ka'ahi Street, 524 Ka'ahi Street. Our vendor there, or the tenant there, is Sand Island Treatment Center. They recently received funding from the state Grants and Aids portion, and they needed just a little bit more money to complete their kitchen that they were doing there for service to folks, the program participants, as well as a job training program over there at 524 Ka'ahi Street. And then finally on here, we have $8 million for potential acquisitions earmarked out of there. During the mayor's State of the City address, he does identify, more investments, further investments in homeless services and homeless programs. He also committed to making sure we get one of these planted in each of the council districts. So we are cognizant of that. We do want to implement that and move forward on that. Earmarked right now is roughly $8 million that we'll be working with Department of Land Management on. And then the last stretch of projects I do have to cover, talk about our federal multi-purpose funds. So these are federal funds that we normally do a good job with. As you see, all our programs are fairly organized, and you see in the far right hand column, we're not looking to lapse any of the funds. So our emergency shelter grants program, those are the vendors that we work with. Our home program, as well as our housing opportunities for persons with AIDS, or HOPWA. On the FY 2024 side, there is indication of a potential lapse in June 30th, 2025 of the FY 2024 home funds that we do have. We did do a solicitation. Unfortunately, we received no bidders on that. We are going to go out to resolicit. The one thing I do want to identify, while it looked like it might lapse in fiscal June 30, 2025, that's only in accordance with the CIP budget. The federal regulations that govern the home program themselves make these funds available to the city for 6 years. So what we'd probably do is, if we don't get any takers by June 30, 2025, create an action to reauthorize the funds for use in, because we do have 6 years to expend this FY 2024 money.
So next up is the appropriations for infrastructure, and Deputy Kevin Auger will be covering this.
Aloha, I'm Kevin Auger. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Housing. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. We have 3 appropriations for affordable housing regional infrastructure planning in the Halava area, Iwilei area, and West Oahu. These appropriations require a state match, and they also require, pursuant to HRS 47-3, these bonds must be issued for public improvements of the county. So we've been working diligently with our state partners to find potential projects that have both a city nexus and can be applied using our bonds. For the Halava area, unfortunately, we've not been able to identify a project. With respect to West Oahu, the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development had been conducting, has contracted to conduct a regional infrastructure plan. Unfortunately, there were no city assets that were included in that primary project area. So we were unable to leverage our appropriation to match their funding or vice versa. However, in Iwilei, we are working with the Hawaii Community Development Agency, and we currently have an MOU outstanding that's being reviewed by both the State Attorney General's Office and by our core council. The state is providing $25 million in funding for electrical infrastructure improvements, and the city is looking to top that up with our $2 million appropriation for planning and design. So we're very hopeful that we'll be able to achieve that before it lapses next year. That contract, the HCDA is looking to put out as a design build, so it will be accelerated. Being able to deploy these funds before a lapse is quite possible. We also have a $20 million appropriation for affordable housing infrastructure development with a priority for sites identified by the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. And we have been working with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. The DHHL was in our offices last week. They'll be here again this week to identify potential projects that we can work on. And we'll have more on that as we continue those discussions. I'm here to answer any questions, and thanks so much for your time.
Next up, we have the Chapter 32 grant incentives for Bill 7 project, and we have Director Takeuchi Apuna here to present on that.
Aloha chairs, members of the committee, Don Apuna, DPP. So for Bill 1 grants, okay, thanks. Thank you. So for fiscal year 2022, there was an appropriation for $300,000, and we expended $147,000 for Bill 7 project Pu'uhue Place. And then in fiscal year 2023, there was another $300,000 appropriation that was lapsed. And for fiscal year 2024, there's a $3 million appropriation. There's currently 46 projects in the pipeline, and we have yet to issue any of those grants. As of today, there are a total of 1,663 units that are projected and are pending with DPP. 237 of those units are of a status inspections in progress. So that means that they're getting close, that they've constructed and they need to close out the permit. And then when they get the certificate of occupancy, they can apply for the grant. And then the remaining 1,426 permits are either status of approved to issue or plans review in progress. So we are hoping that those will move along quickly to approval and then construction and then CO. And I just would like to remind the committee that these are operating funds and not CIP funds. Thank you. I'm here for any questions. Thanks.
Denise Matsubara, Office of Housing, to present on private activity bonds under DPP. But before I go ahead and do that, I'd like to introduce our new private activity bond administrator. This is her second week on the job, Elsa Kings. She comes to us from Catholic Charities Hawaii, doing development and asset management for them. She was also a housing trust fund manager in the city of Bellevue, Washington. So, Elsa?
Good morning, council members. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Elsa Kings, and as Denise said, I am the Private Activity Bonds Administrator who will be focusing on the management of the Affordable Housing Fund, as well as the private activity bonds and the GET program. Just a little bit about my professional background, a little bit more about my professional background. My experience spans 20 years of affordable housing, mostly in the Pacific Northwest. I have extensive experience in 4% low-income housing tax credits and bond program, 9% tax credits and new market tax credits. I also have worked on several projects that utilize the permanent supportive housing program. In addition, I have worked on several affordable housing initiatives in Seattle and the city of Bellevue that utilize TOD sites for affordable housing, as well as the site disposition of publicly owned land. And mostly recently, as Denise mentioned, I have been working with the Catholic Charities on their Halepolina development, which is a great new development in the city, in the island of Maui, that will be helpful for the initiative of the Maui Strong and providing affordable housing on the island. I do want to thank you for the opportunity. I am very grateful, and I am honored to serve in this capacity the residents of the island of Oahu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elsa. So for the private activity bonds for this city, You see the allocations on the slide deck. The city, if you will recall, had retained their 2020 bond allocation in the prior administration. However, they did not establish a program. That program was established under this administration a couple years after. So the 2020 bond cap and the 2022 bond cap were retained by the city. The city has to administer and issue those bonds. The 2021 and 2023 caps were reassigned to the city. The total award is for roughly $258 million to support over 950 affordable units. So, next slide, please. This is the progress of the bond awards. Mauna Kea Towers was awarded, their loan closed, I believe, last year. They're about 50% complete in their renovation and rehabilitation of Mauna Kea Towers. The other award went to Jack Hall Waipahu for 144 units. They are about 40% complete in their rehabilitation. Can you go back to the first slide? So what we want to show you here is that the remaining balance of all our private activity bond allocations up until 2023 have all been either issued out or awarded out. And then we will get ready for our fiscal year 24 bond allocation, which we will be working with HHFDC on a new cooperative agreement to administer. Thank you. Next up, we have CDBG. However, I do not see Director Kawano in the room. So you have the slides, and this is an example of all the expenditures, the planned uses of the CDBG fund. I do believe that BFS submitted their report on CDBG earlier in February. It's part of the CAPER report that goes to the council. We can defer any questions that we can't answer to BFS for later answering, but we will do our best to answer. And at this time, I believe that concludes our presentation. We're happy to stand by for any questions and or comments.
Mahalo, Director. We'll proceed with remote testifiers. I don't believe we have anyone testifying online. So with that, we'll go to in-person testimony, and anybody in the chamber wishing to testify can come forward. Having no registered testifiers or unregistered testifiers, we'll go ahead and close testimony, and we'll go to questions. I know everybody probably has a lot. I know we have several, and so we'll open it up to the members to maybe do the first round, and then can keep going from there. And then also would recognize Council Chair Waters in the chamber as well. So if there's any questions, members feel free, and then you can also feel free to call up individual directors. Councilmember Tolba.
Thank you, chairs. DLM, please. Morning, Director. Are there any projects that the department is currently looking at funding?
Yes, so we are actively working on several acquisitions, which could draw down on it, but whether it closes this year or not is unknown.
And what can you explain the process for the recommending projects for this, particular appropriation?
So for affordable housing projects, the city recently entered into a broker agreement so that, historically the city has been receptive to proposals for acquisitions. Now we can be proactive. Now we can say, this is what we're looking for, and they can assist us with finding something. Once they identify a potential project, we typically bring it to the Affordable Housing Working Group for discussion. Does this meet our criteria? At that point, then we would, if it aligns with the city's criteria, then we would enter into due diligence.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Next up, we'll have Councilmember Tupola, followed by Councilmember Say.
I'll just do a few, and then I'll circle back on the next round. Who shall I start with? Let's start with DCS. Thank you so much for your presentation and for updating us. It was really good to hear all of the different things. Two things that stood out for me in your community revitalization funds was the funding of Sand Island Treatment Center. So I work with various nonprofits that do drug rehabilitation, and many are concerned that the city and state continues to give money to Sand Island Treatment Center after, people were drastically underpaid. There was lots of fiscal mismanagement. So has those things been cleared up and now the city feels like we are good to give those funds? Or are you guys looking into helping other rehab centers? Because I do know many. And so I just kind of wanted to hear your reasoning behind that particular one.
So I guess there's two parts to the response. First response is DCS did do a monitoring of Sand Island Treatment Center. One of the issues and areas we did take a look at was the area you mentioned about the compensation issue. We did receive satisfactory information that those issues have been resolved, and we are moving forward with the program. The second part of the question, I guess maybe three parts. Part two of the question I want to respond to is that when we expend bond funds, city bond funds, our advice that we received so far is that we have a clearer shot and less issues working with city-owned properties when we invest these bond funds. It is difficult, and we haven't quite charted a path through in expending city bond funds on privately owned properties. So that's a big one when we're looking at those funds. DCS is working with, starting to work with more programs. Happy to take referrals from you, Councilmember Tupuola, if you have any programs you'd like us to start working with. We're always trying to expand our network, and as Anton, Director Krucky often says, we need beds of many flavors to solve homelessness. We're also looking at making investments in individual districts as well.
Thank you. That's very clear, and I appreciate you answering that. The second question I had was, we are giving some funds to Partners in Care, and they are the coordinated entry system for our homelessness. And a conversation I had with Mr. Burkeen recently was about our regions. And so right now, the regions for Partners in Care do not align with any other regions, not with parks, not with our council districts, not with HPD districts. So when we do the point-in-time homeless count, it's not as advantageous when I have Region 3 cutting through my district, Region 7 as part of my district. So, I mean, I personally think since we're giving funds, is there a way that we align their districts with our HPD districts so that our CPT officers are working within certain homeless regions? I just think it would be a lot more effective.
We'll work with, so those districts align with the state, who is a major funder of the outreach, the primary funder of the outreach. So the state currently manages how those districts are drawn and how those contracts are awarded, and the point-in-time count then follows those state contracts in those districts and zones. But we will reach out to Department of Human Services, Homeless Programs Office, and we can have conversations around that topic.
I did talk to Mr. Burkeen directly, and he said they don't do the regions because actually Director of Partners in Care told me that the state does, and the state said we don't. They said we don't actually distribute our contracts on our own regions. We follow theirs. So wherever it lands, it needs to be redrawn. Because I think the Chief Zero contract that kind of cuts through Wahiawa, Mililani, it's really difficult because it has parts of Kapolei. So in your effectivity of how you guys expend funds, I think we need to be mindful of how the programs that we're giving funds to are actually operating so that it's like boots on the ground as much as possible, that money affecting our districts and the homeless that are within those districts.
Thank you for the feedback. We'll work together on an efficient solution on that.
Thank you so much. I'll wait for the next round. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Councilmember Say, followed by Committee Chair Wire.
Let me talk. Question, Ms. Matsubara, Denise. Can you explain to the council the coordination between the state and the city in regards to the private activity bond reallocation to the state? Why is that?
The cooperative agreement that we have allows the city to partner with the state because they have the infrastructure to underwrite and evaluate the volume of applications received by the state. And the state in order to make the private activity bond work, you need the LIHTC credit, the 4% non-volume cap credit, in order to make the bonds work properly. So this current round of financing, they received 29 applications. The applications run about 3 to 4 binders thick for one application, full of financial information. So the infrastructure is there to carefully evaluate it based on criteria that is connected to the LIHTC.
Okay. Does the general public understand what LIHTC is?
So the low-income housing tax credit program, it's an IRS program. It's the only program of scale that can fund and support the development of affordable rentals.
Okay. So basically, we agreed with the state in regards to a big chunk of the private activity bonds for their state project, right? They encumbered it.
So under the cooperative agreement, it directs our private activity bonds to Oahu projects and prioritizes new projects. I'm sorry, new development.
But in the case of Mauna Kea, that's not a new project, it's just a major renovation.
In the case of Mauna Kea, so for the 2020 bond and the 2022 bond allocations, those were retained by the city, so it didn't fall under the cooperative agreement, subject to the statute that the law that was changed to allow the cooperative agreement that puts a priority on new housing units. Okay. So we can do rehabilitation if we retain the bonds ourselves. So with only one person newly assigned to private activity bonds, the infrastructure still is within the team at the state.
And then one final thought for me, it was in regards to going back to 2019 with the adoption of Bill 7, then 2021, Bill 1 for the mayor's appropriation, and now today, a measure in regards to Bill 3. My question is it possible that for those applicants who are applying for the Bill 7 grants do not acquire their properties, but work with the landowners because of what has happened with the evolution of a particular measure that now says, you can do a pre and a post. My point is, the biggest issue that we all face today is one of the major criteria or factors contributing to the overall cost is land. I'm saying, can we replace the Bill 7 developer from acquiring those properties and the city acquires those properties and lease it back for $1 a year? The idea is basically trying to get these projects moving, but more importantly, can you finance it? If I'm a developer, I buy the real estate property, that's going to be part of my overall equation in regards to the cost. It seems like some of our developers are trying to acquire properties from small families in consolidation. So my point, are we not getting away from what was the original Bill 7 with this concept of pre-construction financing versus post-construction, the grant program? Your thoughts? I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but my whole point is that I'm trying to figure out how to way to get all these projects affordable. That's all it is. Affordable in the gap group of 60% AMI and below.
So let me see if I understand the question in all of that. Can the city acquire land and then make it available for Bill 7 projects?
Right.
I would have to say that, so using our CIP funds, we would have to retain ownership of the land. We could lease it for a Bill 7 project, theoretically. I just don't know what the developer's reaction would be to that. A lot of times they do want to own it, but that certainly could be considered. in all of that. I'm going to look to DLM Director or my deputy if they have any further comments on that.
Maybe Kathy. Kathy, do you have any question, thoughts on that? That DLM would, the council would appropriate the funds for land acquisition, which we have a program, but it's strictly for Bill 7 projects that may be in the primary.
That's actually something that we're working on. We're looking for a bunch of different ways to make housing affordable, and one of them is to take out the land costs. And so that is something that we're evaluating. One of the big challenges with that has been, as Director Matsubara mentioned, whether it's compliant with the tax and bond codes, but it definitely is something that we're looking at. So thank you for the suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have Committee Chair Wire, followed by Council Vice Chair Kia Aina.
Thank you, Chair. I guess this would be for DCS. And as you're coming up, Deputy Director, I just wanted to first double check something I heard earlier because I wanted to make sure. So under the homeless service facilities, the $8 million discussed, was that specific to Mayor's discussion of core, or it's just more broad, or what exactly would that look like?
So in the Mayor's State of the City address, he identified making more investments in homeless services and facilities. He also directed his comment on that to making investments in each council district. So DCS does want to make good on that promise. Currently, we identified $8 million, but I mean, there is available funding still left in that appropriation if we do need to go beyond that.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I just bring it up because I know Director Ireland had mentioned kind of similar vein, having core services in every region as well. And so would that be different type of funding that they'd be using for that probably? So
what we're discussing today is our capital improvement money. So what Dr. Ireland would need to operate his program would be operation funds or coming out of the operational budget, not the capital improvement budget. More than happy to work with CORE and Dr. Ireland. If he does need facilities in the areas, we can definitely look at that as an opportunity.
Okay, so if they were looking for additional locations, it could potentially be this source of funding they'd work with DCS on in terms of acquiring particular parcels.
Correct.
Okay.
But we are working closely with Dr. Ireland on other initiatives. Just recently we had a discussion with bringing them on board, giving them their own tent at Honu, if they want to make a home base or something of a triage center out there. So we are working with them, and if this grows from that partnership, more than happy to accommodate.
Okay, no, I appreciate that clarification. And then I know we had talked about tiny home projects earlier. What source of funding would that be potentially from again?
So currently we do have $11,987,000 from a congressional earmark from Senator Schatz and Senator Hirono. Recognizing that HUD doesn't necessarily recognize tiny homes yet in the way terms that they're manufactured and being less than a full home. What we're looking to do is invest that funds, and we may be able to stretch those funds over multiple projects relative towards infrastructure and site preparation work, so we can stay within the boundaries of the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then utilize the efficiencies of the emergency proclamation to construct those homes.
Okay, and when we're talking about tiny homes, would that be low barrier, transitional, non-congregate space, right? Or would it be more permanent, or what would kind of be the setup?
For Director Crookie and I, our philosophy would be for them to be as low barrier transitional homes. So folks coming off the street that might not be housing ready yet before moving into a multifamily home. One of the stories I often tell is, with a housing first voucher, if I take somebody off the street with an addiction, mental health issue, if they're having a bad day, they'll act out in their unit, and their neighbors, concerned for their well-being, don't know what to do but call 911. And somebody on the road to recovery having one bad step or one bad day involving HPD and possibly exiting their home in a squad car, only adds more trauma to their process and another layer for their healing. Some of this village approach where you have lived experience or shared experience, Edward having a bad day in his home, acting out, somebody like Eileen, might knock on my door saying, hey, Edward, you're going to get through this. I know what you're going through, and have that kind of result, not necessarily a 911 intervention. And something like that's going to add more trauma, but add more healing to the process. So that's what we envision our tiny homes to operate as. And then if folks do graduate from the program, can seek housing in some of the other affordable projects, but really to create a pipeline and a pipeline into other inventory that we have coming on board.
Okay, I appreciate that. And just in understanding just the gaps that exist, particularly regionally, I think Central Oahu in particular has a lot of state land, maybe some ADC land, that I think is situated around, particularly off like Willikina, so near maybe transit services or easily, set up for transit services, bus lines and whatnot, but then outside the immediate, central part of Wahiawa. And would, I think, facilitate a process of facilitating folks into those types of situations directly from the community, right? From the sidewalk into transitional space. Understanding that, really grateful for the California Ave property. And then that's like one subset, right, of the community for families, which is also very needed. But just throwing that out there, like you said, you're talking to Mr. Mizuno, so I hope that, maybe that could be looked at.
Thank you. We will follow up with Director Mizuno over at the state side.
Mahalo. Yeah, Vice Chair Kiaina.
Thank you. Can I call up Director of Housing, please, with regard to the CDBG program? Director, this is something, as you know, that I've talked a lot about one-on-one with some of the different relevant agencies as well as previous hearings. The CDBG program, again, I just start from its acronym. Can you tell us what the C stands for in the CDBG program? Community. Okay, that's what I thought. And so the reason I keep on saying that is it seems that we have to keep on telling us that because it seems that the manner of how we are administering this program makes it a city development block grant where we're using the CDBG program as a piggy bank to provide funding because there seems to be no, robust CDBG program. That's how I feel. And let me just read again what this program is supposed to do. The Community Development Block Grant Program supports community development activities to build stronger and more resilient communities. Activities may address needs such as infrastructure, economic development projects, public facilities installation, community centers, housing rehabilitation, public service, acquisition, microenterprise assistance, code enforcement, homeowner assistance. Do you believe that in looking at the list of projects that describes what I just read right now? Even if it supposedly meets HUD approval?
In looking at the list of projects, a lot of them involved acquisitions. It looks like for special needs housing, some of them have been improvements for HFD and for the parks. So your comments are well taken.
With regard to the parks, as you know, we fought to have a set aside during the transient accommodations tax so that DPR would receive a sliver of funding, and I believe that amounts to about $8 million annually, which is similar to the overall pot for CDBG. So the reason I'm telling you this is, again, this shouldn't be coming as a surprise. I just would like to recommend that you, the administration, wean yourselves off of the CDBG funds for parks because you have another set aside for parks, and to hopefully look at some of the other areas more robustly as it pertains to providing funds for nonprofit organizations as well to do all of this. In particular, I know that you guys have some programmatic funding going to the Department of Community Services
but I think that it could be improved with regard to overall workforce development in the field, homelessness, affordable housing, and economic development. Do you know, with regard to the parks, I know that it was multi-year funding. When is it going to end? When is funding for these park improvements going to end? Do you know the fiscal year?
So that's a good question. I'm going to look at Director Kawano if he has anything to say on that. But before he comes up, I just want to say that the comments are valid, and the administration needs to take a closer look at those comments, and we appreciate the guidance and we want to work with you on it. So Director Kawano.
Good morning, Housing Committee Chair and Council Chair, Vice Chair Andy Kawano, Director of Budget and Fiscal Services. We, with regard to the park projects, we are working on, scheduling to finish the projects up. Most of the projects that we had scheduled were multi-year, and unfortunately, as we've reported in prior hearings and meetings, we encountered a number of obstacles coming out of COVID, including working with SHPD, construction companies having issues getting supplies and materials to do the work that they plan to do. We're working on tightening up the schedule, but I got to be frank with you. Our goal for FY26, should we decide that we're going to continue to use CDBG funding for these long-term park projects, is to ensure that we have planning in place and we have everything fully encumbered.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So do you think that we could complete it in fiscal 26?
I can't say that for sure right now. I mean, it's going to be a challenge to complete everything in fiscal 26. What I want to say is that by the end of 26, we have a firm schedule, and that all of the contracts that we need to have in place are in place and encumbered. If we don't have that comfort level, we would like to work with council and seriously consider permanently reprogramming CBDG funding away from a few of the park projects if we can't get them nailed down.
I would welcome that. And what I would like to see is the rest of the percentage of the funding. I feel that to have a robust program, as I keep on saying, and I don't know where it should be, whether it be in the Department of Community Services or the Office of Economic Revitalization. I just, this idea that this is such a small pot that it's not something to worry about bothers me, because I feel that if you look at DCS's itemization of all of the other federal funds that they get, they do a good job. So I'm sorry, why don't they have capacity to do CDBG? That's all. And again, the reason I care so deeply about this program is because I remember when I worked at the federal level, we had all of these nonprofit organizations who used to compete for it because it's one of the few pots that they are eligible for. And I feel that it's floundered. We're not even talking about nonprofit organizations anymore. So anyway, just thank you so much. I know I've talked to you guys one-on-one. And Director of Housing, thank you for reminding us what the C means in this program. It means community. Thank you.
Chair Cordero, followed by Council Chair Waters.
Okay, thank you. This question is relating to the Affordable Housing Fund, and I think this would be for DCS and DLM, but maybe I'll call up Director Tashner as it relates to the new solicitation. First off, I just want to start off with the basics relating to how much money is appropriated, or is there a cap for the Affordable Housing Fund?
So the Affordable Housing Fund is established by the charter. It appropriates 0.5% of the annual real property tax revenue. Right now, I believe that's in the ballpark of about $8 million per year. Yeah. So there isn't a cap, but it is tied to the revenue generated.
Okay, $8 million per year, you said. Okay. And then, so for the different appropriations under the Affordable Housing Fund, where we see there are planned appropriations, does that mean it's planned through multiple fiscal years?
So the Affordable Housing Fund is available on an annual basis. Apologies, so you're referring to the, I guess, first slide?
Yes.
So those 3 projects were selected based on a solicitation that DCS issued.
Okay, got it. And then how is it determined to expand the use of the funds through different districts and or regions based off of, kind of going off of what Councilmember Tupola was talking about?
So the use of the fund is tied to the language in the charter. I think there are opportunities to look across the island to award, and I think that's in fact what DCS did. I think with the last solicitation, there were awards in many, 6 different districts. Yeah,
6 different districts. Okay, and how do we evaluate where there are gaps in different communities, where we can then reappropriate or reallocate particular funding?
So the Affordable Housing Fund, the solicitation that will be issued has ranking criteria, and so the awards will be given based on how many points the proposer accumulates. Yeah, that's probably the best way to answer the question.
Okay, got it. And how would you determine because there are different I guess, buckets of funding. For example, we have affordable housing with preference in transit-oriented development areas program. And of course, with our budget going, we like to know which buckets are tapped into most and which we would consider successes, right? And so we can best appropriate or support projects going into each bucket or coming from each bucket. So how would you measure the success per project to multiple projects at once? And also, how would we be able to, sorry, let me just read it. How is success or progress measured per project? And can we measure the success that is allocated through multiple projects at once?
So at least for the Department of Land Management projects, primarily what we've been doing over the past year has been acquisitions. When doing acquisitions, we look to see what available pot of funding exists and what restrictions, if any, that may put onto the property. Part of that will be determined during due diligence, and so that's a really important step for us. Sometimes it's difficult to know in advance. Sometimes it also depends on what the intended use of the property is. So it is a property by property or project by project analysis.
Understood. Because let's say affordable housing funds were used for a project that is within TOD, would we then state that the use of the funds from the affordable housing fund was successful, or would it have been best used in the affordable housing with preference in TOD areas program bucket?
I think it depends on what the goal for the asset is. For example, for the Affordable Housing Fund that's established by the charter, that carries the 60, it has to be affordable for the 60% AMI for 60 years. For some projects, that might be appropriate. For the Affordable Housing with preference in TOD CIP appropriation, that one, we have to maintain the compliance for the life of the bond, which is typically 25 years. So depending upon the asset and the intended goal for use, it really does depend. And so success will be measured based upon, how compliant we can be.
How are we able to measure that for future revenue or possible, we don't know how our economy is going to be in the future. How do we measure that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Because the life of the bond, the use, we've seen unintended consequences for different types of funding before. So how do we know what the funding that we're using now is not going to be prohibitive in the future?
Well, I think that was a really big challenge that we faced, with this administration faced with the first year of appropriations. And so we were so grateful for the support that we got from the council to expand the use and to expand the appropriation language so that we can develop projects that are more needed by the community.
Okay, understood. And my last question for my first round is, you mentioned the new solicitation for the rest of the fiscal year, right? Do you anticipate any administrative rules changes or maybe possible policy changes that you need to work with the council to better expend the new solicitation for this fiscal year and then for future fiscal years?
For this solicitation, we will be issuing it in compliance with the charter language. If there is a need to deviate from that in the future, we're happy to work with you.
Okay, so you haven't determined any need for possible charter amendments or anything like that?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm good with my first round, and so I'll call Council Chair Waters.
Thank you. First off, thank you, Councilmember Cordero and Wire, for having this hearing. I think, as we're walking door to door, going to neighborhood boards and talking to constituents, affordable housing is the #1 issue. So the fact that we're having this hearing and bringing the various departments to come and talk about it, I think is important. And I might suggest that we do it even more often. But the fact of the matter is, the state legislature is poised to pass Senate Bill 3202, which would put requirements on the various counties to add more inventory for affordable housing. And you may recall when we had a hearing on a resolution against this, Grassroots Institute, Ted Kafales came in here and said, we've been failing. The city and county has been failing. And that's why the legislature needs to step in and require us to do certain things. So keeping that in mind, I'd like to thank the city administration for their hard work and this council, but honestly, I think we all can do better. From our point of view, we've tried to put money in the budget, but a lot of it is going unspent, or perhaps not being spent as wisely as it could, as pointed out, using the CDBG funds. So keeping that in mind, can I call up Department of Land Management? Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
One of the things when Councilmember Talbo was asking you questions, you said that the Affordable Housing Working Group meets, and as long as it fits city criteria. Can you tell us what city criteria is?
Yes, so we've been working with the Affordable Housing Group to establish acquisition criteria. It depends on whether it's a vacant piece of property versus an adaptive reuse property, but we have tried to set minimum criteria for what we're looking for.
And what is that?
It's still in progress. We have a strong working draft. We can share it with you. Once it's complete.
I guess that's what I'm talking about, us doing better. Because if you don't even know the criteria, then we're not going to get anything done. So what you're saying is the criteria is currently being debated, talked about, and developed?
We have criteria, yes. We continue to refine it, but we are using that criteria to evaluate potential acquisitions.
That'd be great. Can you provide that to this committee, what the criteria is?
Sure, we'd be happy to.
One of the things, just looking at Waikiki Vista, and there's another property on Ina Road. I think it was $8 million that we use CDBG funding for. But how much money is spent on renovating these properties? Let's start with Waikiki Vista as an example. So how much did the city spend on Waikiki Vista?
The city spent about $42 million.
$42 million, and then how many?
Oh, excuse me, sorry, 37. million.
37 million. And how many units are in Waikiki Vista?
Gosh, 108 studio units.
108. And did we have to spend any money renovating Waikiki Vista?
So I will defer to DCS as to renovations. Please note that the acquisition was fully funded by federal SLFRF funds,
Yep.
not city monies.
Correct, but it was expended by the city.
It was expended by the city, yes. And in addition to the 108 studio units, there's also four or five floors of office space and other units that can be used by the
just
city.
doing the math, right? If you take 37 million, divide that by 108, we're talking 342,000 per unit. And these, I've been in the building. The units are basically dormitory units, right?
They were being used by the past owner as dormitory units, yes.
Right, so you're not talking 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. We're talking basically studio units, yeah? Correct?
Correct.
So, again, it's looking, is that in your mind meeting the criteria that you set forth for these purchases and acquisitions?
Each acquisition is going to be on a per property review. I think what the unique opportunity that existed with Waikiki Vista was not only were there units that could be used for housing, but there was also adequate space to do wraparound services. And so I think in partnership with DCS and with the community, that really gave us a unique opportunity. So there are acquisition criteria. You know, we're looking for X number of units in this location or things like that. But there are also intangibles that need to be considered on a per property basis.
Okay. And I totally agree with the idea that we have wraparound services. As mentioned earlier from DCS, if somebody's having a bad day, the wraparound services can possibly help with that. Just turning to the slide deck, although it's under a Department of Community Services, you and I have been working on the 1615 Alawai Boulevard project. That one was an acquisition of a piece of property in Waikiki in the apartment zone area. You know, one of the things I'm advocating for is, along with what Councilmember Say was talking about, is taking land, turning it over to a developer, and let them build it. And we just give them guidelines. You know, Halewai Olu, I talk about that a lot. We turned over the land to them for $1 a year for 65 years. We said we wanted homes built or apartments built at a certain AMI and below. To me, that's the recipe. It works. Rather than acquiring buildings that need extensive renovation, why aren't we doing more of that? And I know, are you still considering renovating 1516 Alawai?
So that's exactly, I think we're in alignment. The administration has been working on solicitations for leases of city-owned property to a developer for low or no cost so that they can be responsible for whatever improvements are made. Kihapai, for example, the city acquired the property last August and issued a solicitation looking for a developer to redevelop the property under a long-term ground lease. The developer selection period, actually, their response period ends today, so we'll be evaluating that. Later this year, we're hoping to issue additional solicitations, 1615 being one of them, where the city leases the land to a developer and they are responsible for that.
Yeah, so Kihapai is a good example. Are there any other examples where you're looking at utilizing that process?
So we're hoping to do between 3 and 4 solicitations this calendar year. One is Kihapai, one is 1615, Delight Bakery, and a road.
And a road
1615, yeah.
is an existing building, right?
Correct.
And what would you do with that?
So we are evaluating whether we can offer it through a solicitation so that a developer can enter into a long-term ground lease and development agreement with the city to rehabilitate the property.
I see. Turning to the slide deck, it doesn't have a page number here, but it was for $5 million. Affordable housing with preference in TOD area programs acquire land, plan, design, construct, and provide funds for other miscellaneous costs. So it says here it was $5 million were appropriated, but potential lapse as of June 30th, 2024 is $5 million. So the council appropriated $5 million to acquire land, and it looks like this is going unspent. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And why is that? Why are we not acquiring land, utilizing this $5 million?
So we do evaluate acquisitions on behalf of the city. As we just discussed, we're also looking at activating existing city lands. The Department of Land Management is extremely constrained in terms of capacity to do these types of acquisitions. We currently have 5 staff who do all acquisitions, all development agreements, all leases, and all grants of easements. So they're extremely constrained. So while we are focusing on acquisitions, we're also looking at activating city lands, which require no expended funds by the city. Other challenges with expending these funds within the 2-year period is that it's difficult to align the 2 years with construction and other financing cycles. So it's just another challenge that we're looking at. We do understand that there is intense need for affordable housing, and that's reflected in the appropriations. But realistically, it is extremely challenging to expend all of the appropriated funds before they lapse.
I just turning to the next page. 35 million was appropriated, and it looks like 35 million will lapse on June 30th, 2025. We have a little bit more time on this one, but it's affordable housing with preference in TOD area programs, provisions of funds for the acquisition of land, again, plan, design, and construct. So are you saying that it's probably unlikely that you're going to be able to expend this 35 million that the council appropriated for affordable housing in TOD areas?
We are hoping to encumber some of it, but we still have over a year left, so it's unclear what amount.
And turning to the next page, similarly under the Department of Land Management, the council appropriated $170 million for affordable housing funds for the acquisition of land, plan, design, and construct for affordable housing. You did expend $41 million for Evilay Center, and there looks like there's an additional $92 million. What exactly is the city's plans with the Evilay Center?
So the Evilay Center is a 4-acre piece of property that's located adjacent to the future Kavili rail station. We're hoping to use that as a catalyst to redevelop the entire area.
Okay, can you be more specific? When it's a catalyst, are we going to, it's supposed to be for affordable housing. So how many units do you plan to put there? How many families do you think we're gonna be able to house there?
At this point, it's unclear what the exact design will look like, and the unit count is also unclear at this point, but we're hoping that it's going to be at least 750 units, at least.
Okay. In order to get 750 units, are you going to demolish the existing property?
We're still evaluating that, but likely, yes.
I see. Okay, what is the height limit there?
I can respond to that in writing after. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Okay, but you're saying that it also meets the city's criteria? And again, you're going to provide the criteria to us?
We'll provide the criteria to you. I actually think it'd be really helpful for the council members to have the criteria. You know your communities best. You have the best beat on what the needs are. It would be helpful to have your feedback on, what would work, because we do acknowledge that each council member, each council district is totally different. So happy to provide that to you.
That would be very, very helpful, just because I think all of us want to build affordable housing, and if we can identify pieces of property within each of our districts, knowing that it meets the criteria up front, knowing that your department is understaffed, that perhaps we can help. Last question, and thank you for indulging me, chairs. One of the things you talked about earlier was that it has to meet certain, I guess, requirements of the bond, right? Bond funding. Can you expound upon what exactly that means, so that if we get on this side of the bar are able to locate properties in our district, that we're not just spinning our wheels. Like, what are these requirements that we need to be aware of? And in Evile, that one parcel where we put a commercial kitchen on the bottom, and we can't put housing on the top. Is that what you're talking about?
So there are several layers of bond law that apply, as well as tax law. And so that's something that we work with the Department of Budget and Fiscal Services, as well as Corporation Counsel and Bond Counsel, to evaluate on a property-by-property basis. One of the restrictions, for example, is that it needs to be a public improvement of the county that requires that the county has a certain amount of oversight over the asset. And so historically, that has precluded leasing relationships with operators. So those are things that we continue to evaluate in connection with our other sister departments.
So are you saying then that we cannot expend bond money to acquire land if we're going to turn it over like we did to Halewai'olu?
We can, but it does have to go under a pretty intensive analysis.
And how long does that intensive analysis take?
It can take months.
Okay, months aren't bad, but, we need to build more affordable housing. Chair Cordero asked if there's any need from our side to change ordinances or to suggest charter amendments that could help you, or lobby the legislature to get this done. By the way, there was a bill, right, at the legislature this year to allow us more flexibility with bonds. Can you update us on what happened there?
Denise Matsubara, Office of Housing. Thank you for the question, Chair Waters. So Senate Bill 2337 regarding mixed use and authorizing the county to do mixed use was something that we had pursued this session. One of the whole reasons was the bonds that we currently have limited us to do just housing. And in this proviso, it calls for mixed use, and we don't have that statutory authority right now. So a bill did pass out of conference. It does have a proviso that has a sunset of 4 years. We currently have tenants in Evile Center that have a 3-year lease. Our bond terms are 20 years, so it's a bit of an issue. But the good news is the bill did pass, but we do have to go back to the legislature to try and get that sunset lifted if we really want to take advantage of the bonds. I'm going to look at Director Kawano if he has anything to add.
Andy Kawano, Director of Budget and Fiscal Services. I believe that what was shared by Director Iseri Matsubara is accurate. The difficulty is, 4-year sunset will make it really hard to get one of these larger projects off of the ground. It takes years. So we're hoping that we can either eliminate or extend out that sunset date. Actually, there shouldn't be one if we're all serious about affordable housing. One of the things that we have to understand is that there are two sets of laws that we have to comply with. You have the statutory, the state, and our ordinances and our terms of appropriation, which is an ordinance, budget ordinance. We have to comply with that, and that's the requirement that bond funds be used for capital improvements of the county. On the tax side, because a lot of our financing is tax exempt, if we use tax exempt bond proceeds, any kind of contract tied to the property has to be analyzed because it's deemed to be private use. So, when we do these leases to developers right now, every lease that we enter into to developers to do the development and perhaps the property management as well will have to be analyzed as the project evolves and goes into operation. There's a limitation. So, and then there's a couple major tests that we have to pass every year. If we don't pass the two major groups of tests that happen, what will happen is we're going to be forced by IRS law, Treasury law, to actually refinance the tax-exempt bond issuance used to taxable. And the difference between tax-exempt and taxable financing is quite a bit. We're talking about 1.5%, maybe even up to 2%, depending on the maturity date of the bond. So it's a complicated process, and I think that's why it takes long. You know, the projects are all multi-year in nature. So just wanted to share that.
No, thank you. But, you know, let me ask you this, because every year we appropriate money for exactly the two things that I just mentioned, 35 million and 5 million that are going unspent. Are we spinning our wheels by keep putting this money in if it's not going to be spent? I mean, is it allowable first? I know you're talking about this complicated process, but what I'm trying to get at is, can we acquire land and then turn it over to a private developer to build? Because as we know, it's super expensive to buy land here in Hawaii. So, you know, that's one thing we can take off of the developer's plate, and hopefully that'll reduce the cost of the development. So can we do it?
We can, but like everything else, there's limits. I didn't want to get into this because you didn't ask this question. We can, as a team, if we look at ourselves as a team, appropriate any amount of money in CIP as we want to, you know, within reason. Mm-hmm. The appropriation in CIP is an authorization provided to the administration to, you know, expend monies for capital improvement projects and programs. We have a limit, right? Because we have debt service we have to pay. So to the extent that we are, you know, unable to use all of the appropriation as we've discussed today, and, you know, the whole team is working hard on affordable housing initiatives, but to the extent that we can use it, it's not a bad thing, because what happens is that we limit, you know, we control debt service. And I can tell you right now, in working with rating agencies such as Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, the city currently is at a very good rating. We're at a AA plus, so 2A plus. And when we're compared to our peers that are rated at the same level, we're told consistently that to get higher and even to maintain where we are right now, we have to watch our fixed costs, and we have to watch our leverage. So the amount of debt we have in relation to our operating, you know, expenditures, and we're kind of pushing the barrel, so to speak, in leverage, because you know, we're higher because of HART. In terms of GO bonds, we have the HART borrowing, and even though we're funding it through state general excise tax and state TAT, and to some extent the Oahu TAT, the debt is still looked at as if it's city debt, it's city liability. We're still liable for it, even though HART's covering it. By,
that's a whole nother conversation.
That's, yeah. So,
Can we go back to affordable housing discussion, please?
Yeah, tied to affordable housing, to the extent that we don't expend what we appropriate, it's not all bad. That's the point I wanted to make.
No, I get that, and thank you for allowing me extra time. But my point is, though, we need to be smart with the money that we do expend, and the debt service, obviously, and perhaps buying dilapidated buildings and spending money to refurbish them, as opposed to land that can be built anew. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go round two. Thank you. I'm going to go with Chair Wire, followed by Councilmember Tupola, followed by Councilmember Say.
Mahalo, Chair. And I'll defer to Directors Isari Matsubara or Tashner or Deputy Director Los Baños on the appropriate person to answer. Because one of the questions I had is, I know we have been talking about the transition of the special needs housing inventory, possibly, if there's going to be a standing up of a Department of Land Management and Housing. I just was hoping to get clarity on where the funding would be coming from for special needs housing renovations that may be needed, understanding that there might be a line right between CIP and what would be considered regular maintenance. And so I'm just mainly asking to see what use any of these funds would have, if any, for the special needs housing inventory projects.
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, when I first started speaking today, I had mentioned that we work together great as a team. So, last week I had a great conversation with Director Millis behind me over at the Department of Design and Construction. We have worked through a fairly good and positive working relationship on trying to work through and navigate how do we maintain better our special needs housing inventories. Our special needs housing inventory is a tough one. It can be unpredictable at times. Well, first, if you talk about why it's needed, affordable housing needs recapitalization where they fund things to address deferred maintenance because just through the collection of affordable rents, they're unable to maintain the property and address the big ticket items like elevator modernizations and those types of projects. Special needs housing is no different, but you also got to realize that we have a more vulnerable population that may be harder on the living, right? So you get aggressive teens, you're getting a lot of holes in drywalls, broken doors, and a lot of those kind of things where we might get to a point where all of a sudden you have more patches than solid sheets of drywall, and you got to replace the whole sheet of drywall. So it is a little bit more exciting, if you will, working with our special needs housing inventory, but nothing we would change for the world to do. We are in discussions on where the special needs housing inventory decision has been made yet, but I do believe that the city does need some capacity to better maintain homes. Residential fixtures are a lot different than commercial fixtures, what we see in Honolulu Hale or what we're seeing in our parks and those kind of facilities. You can take a toilet down in a public bathroom here in Honolulu Hale for a week while you're waiting for a part, but if it's in an individual bedroom or a unit, that thing's got to be done overnight, within hours. So, definitely working with this team has been great and has been a fresh breath of fresh air, trying to realize dedicated resources and capital maintenance for housing units. I think it's going to be a big game changer going forward for the city and county of Honolulu. But we can look to utilize these funds now that we have a working relationship and a way forward. Hope to see more of that money.
I have to call a recess. We lost quorum. would like to call the Joint Committee on Budget and Housing, Sustainability, and Health back to order, and I would like to yield the floor back to Deputy Director Los Baños.
Aloha. So I had previously just described, the challenges we have dealing with the special needs housing inventory and what it takes to maintain them and, provide quality experiences so people can move forward and progress with their recovery in them. The point I was trying to make at the end is there's a lot of funding that in the far column says, potential lapse June 30, 2025. Having worked out, some arrangements with Department of Design and Construction and other entities within the city, we're having a working relationship moving forward. We do believe we can look to expend some of those funds and program some of those funds to improve those homes and possibly even customize them to help with the recovery efforts. As you know, Chair Wire, we acquire these homes and they can just be a single family home for a group home, but if they need to service a population, perhaps there's improvements we can make to better service them.
I appreciate that, Director. And it sounds like I'm hearing certain items may be within an operating budget, especially if it needs like immediate attention, like maybe a broken toilet, but maybe other aspects can be contemplated in a larger scale.
Correct, like re-roofing re-roofing would be a good example of a capital improvement.
Okay, so would CIP be useful to do like a mass, like property condition reports or needs assessments, or what are your thoughts on that? Anyone, but yeah, I welcome just kind of contemplating. So when we're looking at the budget, we know where we need to be focusing. Because I think one of our amendments was putting money in CIP specifically for special needs.
Chair Wire, I'd like to actually defer that question to Director Kawano back there. Director Kawano, the question was more specifically, what kind of planning activities can be covered under CIP? Like if we were to do a mass property condition report on all our special needs housing inventory, for example, could that be funded by CIP? I know sometimes because some of it might just be operating type maintenance versus capital improvements. I wouldn't be qualified to give you a bright line on that.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Director Kawano.
Andy Kawano, Director of Budget and Fiscal Services. Yeah, there's no bright line. Generally, you go back to what statute requires, in terms of what the money's being spent for. So you go back to is this expenditure related to improvements of county assets, right? Or improvement of county property. And if the study that, we're just talking about, Deputy Director Los Baños brought up, covers some operating type activities, I think we'd have to look more closely into it, and perhaps all of it may be operating, or there may be an allocation between operating and CIP. But yeah, generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, if you're doing a study, if the study's not going to end up with a permitted project, as a rule of thumb, it's probably not CIP.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Not so much the work itself. I appreciate the note, what you mentioned, but since there's several dozen properties in the city's inventory, particularly the special needs housing inventory, and I'm sure there's a spectrum of needs, right, in terms of things from minor maintenance and repair that would be in the operating budget to maybe larger renovation or rehabilitation to keep these properties within our housing stock. So I think that was just the question, like if it was a mass review that produced a report relating to the entire group of city assets, that I think would be maybe informative on how the operating budget could be used or would need to be used, and then maybe the CIP budget could be used or would need to be used. So that was kind of, I think, the question, because I understand what you're saying in terms of if we identify something as maintenance and repair, that would generally be within the operating, and then the scope maybe and scale of the work. But the planning, I guess, could result in multiple types of projects, right? So
yeah, so Councilmember Wire, thank you for the question. Based on how you're describing, the high-level study, the high-level study will result in perhaps policy and action that we take in the future, not necessarily a project that improves, property of the county. So I would say right off the bat, more likely to be an operating cost than a CIP
Just
cost.
to clarify the studies, it'd be like a property condition report, right? Which is typically a part of.
But you're not really looking at a property. You're looking at everything we own, right, in totality.
Well, there needs to be an individual report for
Yes.
each individual property, right?
Yeah.
And so, for example, some properties may need massive renovation, and then
Right.
some may only need. But you're saying that would be contemplated more in the operating budget.
More likely than not, it'll be operating. Yes.
Okay, appreciate
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Based on
Based on the fact that you're looking
Department
at
of Budget Fiscal
everything at
Services,
a
yeah.
higher level, and you're not really doing the study on a property that'll result in a permitted project. I mean, I'm trying to provide guidelines so, it makes sense. But typically, if you're not going to end up with a permitted project, any work that you do up front is not CIP. So if you're doing a larger scope, mass, global study to look at everything we have and, identify what's maintenance, what's deferred maintenance, what's going to be rehab or replacement, that's probably an operating study because you're taking a broader brush and taking a look at, all of the city assets in total. You're not really focused on a specific project that's going to result in actual improvements to the assets.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So if we wanted that type of study, we'd have to find it in the operating budget.
We're going to have to appropriate it on the operating side, I think, yeah. To me, that would make sense.
Okay. Do we have any funding, and I'll direct this to the other directors present, do we have any funding in any of our budgets for these types of reviews? Could be DLM, could be housing, could be
Thank you.
Deputy Director Los Baños. So I know that there are the master agreements that are going out. Do we envision like these being typical master agreement projects with operating funds attached?
Hi, thank you for the question. So in DLM's operating budget, there is a request to do some property condition reports. Typically, these support the acquisitions. This is part of the due diligence, the studies that we do in advance. In addition, for all of the properties that are under our inventory, because they're income generating, the project typically pays for, I think we do reserve studies on a 5-year basis.
Okay. Are the master agreements broad enough to be used for already acquired assets? Sounds like that may be what I'm hearing.
So there being the master agreement that we're going to bring on to do property condition reports can support both acquisitions and already owned assets by the city.
Okay, perfect, Mahalo. Since I have you up here, I'm going to just ask about the Cunha Boxcar project. Would it be the same form as like Interroad 1615 in terms of getting funds out, or is there another pathway besides the RFP for a private developer to come do the project?
We haven't determined the path yet. I think what we're looking at right now is, the city completed a feasibility study. What we're looking at right now is going through some of the entitlements so that if we do decide to bid it out to a developer, it'll be more entitled and hopefully more attractive.
Okay, Mahalo, I appreciate that. And then I just had one quick question for Director Apuna. We couldn't let you get away with no questions today. And I guess related to the agenda item just because of the conversation about particular use of the property. But I just wanted to see if you had any update on the Avocado Street property. So I know kind of outside the scope of the PAB and the other grant programs, but just, I know we've talked about use of that property, but the question is more just about
Status.
Yeah, what's going on? Because we've gotten some inquiries from the community about just construction that may be started on the property.
Yeah, so even today I've heard from HPD that there's a trailer on I think a trailer with materials to start construction for what is permitted there now. So that's definitely good news that there is activity going on, and we've encouraged the landowner to keep that activity ongoing. Don't allow for any gaps during which, it could be taken over again. So we're pretty optimistic about the current situation. That we met with the landowner. I think he understands that he wants to make the property better and to make the community happy, and that it's a safe project and property. So I think good news, and we'll just continue to monitor and make sure that that happens.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying then there's no further action on DPP side in terms of the structures, that the private owner is going to kind of take care of everything.
Yeah, but we'll continue to monitor. If things kind of slow down or we have other issues, we can still step up enforcement or otherwise. But yes, I think he's definitely on the path to developing the project and making sure that it's used for its intended purposes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Next, we have Councilmember DePola, followed by Councilmember Say, followed by Council Chair Waters.
Thank you, Chair. I guess before I call up a person to ask a question, I just wanted to thank everyone for their questions so far. I couldn't agree more with the sentiment that the CGBD funds be used for the community. I had met already with Director of DCS as well as Director of Housing on what is the exact plan from the administration, and I know that there were talks that there needs to be a plan. I think overall, the presentation thus far for me from all of this is, it's been a little hard to follow. I will say that. There's pieces everywhere. I'm trying to relate everything that you're saying back to the October 2023 housing plan that was released to see if there's like any type of connections, if we're missing things. So I would say that for me overall, what I feel like is lacking is a plan that we can follow, that we know is impacting every single district so we don't have to ask. And I also think the plan should be district by district. We all have different resources in our district. We have different problems. So it's a little difficult, I think, for me to follow. And I just agree with Councilmember Wire that maybe the report of the inventory, but in general, a report of this would. And I understand that what we got was sort of a report, but to me, it was kind of more like a budget sheet. I think what would be helpful, and I'm not saying anyone needs to do this now, but when we present on these, I think you guys' goal was 18,000 homes over the next 6 years, or that's what the housing report said. So I think working backwards from where the goal is, where we're at, are we getting close, far? And to the question about should we have a charter amendment, the idea is we will help you more if we know exactly where we're going, but we're all trying to decipher exactly what the direction is in each of the pots. Another thing that was brought up in the housing plan that we didn't touch today was a housing trust fund. There was mention of Chapter 38. There's various things that I think all relate to this, but I won't ask specific questions. I just think that, Councilmember Waters brought up we can do better. And I think the way we do better is we go back to the plan. How are we doing on the plan that we set out? And are we following it, or are we deterring from it, including all of the pocket of funds that we have that we're expending towards affordable housing? So I guess my first question will be for Director Apuna. One of the things in the housing plan that was mentioned was, of course, the Bill 1 incentives. Everybody was very excited that we were going to have a grant attached to particular projects, but it does look like there's been very few dollars that have been allocated, or not allocated, but used for Bill 1 projects, and it looks like $3 million will lapse. And then also on the bottom in this blue dotted dashed box, it says that DPP is requesting $5 million from the general fund, and that there's an MOA to execute HHFDC and DPP doing like matching funds. So I just wanted to know, are those matching funds related to this Bill 1 incentives? And are we asking for more money because we think we're going to expend more? Because we really haven't done a lot here. So can you explain?
Sure. Thank you for the questions. Yes, the $5 million matching coming from the state is to match the current, or the $5 million that we requested to support and provide grants for all the pending projects. And so we did an estimate based on those that are in process right now with DPP, and based on that, it's roughly about $10 million. And we do feel that there will be more progress. Late last year, we decided as a policy that when Bill 7 projects come in, as well as when they have review cycles, that they'd be put at the top of the pile. So on our end, we are doing our best efforts to address these projects, and we hope that the developers will do the same and return the projects answering all the comments by TPP. So we believe that push will help. We also think that with some of the other improvements and contract with the ICC vendor, that will kind of allow us to move the vendor to do review in certain areas and let up for plan reviewers to kind of focus on Bill 7 projects. So we do think that there'll be more progress coming up that we can expend these funds towards the grants.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you're prioritizing it, then possibly this money would be needed. I'm not sure if you think it'll come into 2024, but we should monitor it closely because going from 147,000 to expending 10 million is like a huge jump. So I don't really know unless we start to see that drawdown if that's realistic. But thank you, Director. My next question is for Director of Housing, Director Isari Matsubari. So with the PAB, actually, it could be for you or the new PAB administrator. I think probably you know the answer though. So I believe what you said was that annually that we in the city and county receive up to 253 million for the PAB cap. Is that correct? What is our deviation, the like roundabout number? Because I know we split it with all the counties.
So what I mentioned was that our total awards came out to close to 260 million to support like 953 units. Our allocation is dictated by Chapter 39B2.
Yep.
So we get 37.55% of the state's allocation. It's going to amount to approximately 142 million for the next fiscal year. For the past fiscal year, for the past calendar year, 2023, it's about 134.7 as shown up on the slide. So those are the allocations.
So we go up to 142 and we've been hovering around 120 to 134, is that correct? On the high end to the low end?
That's correct. So it all depends on what the IRS allocates. Under the Internal Revenue Code, there's a certain dollar limit. It was 110. I think it's like $115 per capita. But because we have a small population, we usually defer to the minimum for small states. And I think the last year's minimum was 358.8 million, and I'm not sure what this year's is, but we usually defer to whatever the small minimum is on a per state basis under the Internal Revenue Code.
Understood. And you said that we retained all 4 years in the county, or did we reallocate one of those years? Is it the 2021 that we gave back to the state?
So we retained, the prior administration retained the 2020 cap. However, they were unable to stand up a program. So this administration stood up a program, I believe it was in 21, and then they made awards in the following year, I believe, and you also retained the 2022 cap of 125.8 million.
So you're looking at, especially because now we have an administrator, that we would retain the private activity bonds going forward.
So our recommendation is to continue the partnership with HHFDC because they have the infrastructure to evaluate the low-income housing tax credit applications, which has to coordinate with the private activity bonds in order to make them work.
Right, needs to go together. And I guess last thought for you, I mean, especially because you helped to author the plan that was released last year. I'm looking at it, I'm kind of making notes on which parts you guys are touching, but there are parts that haven't been addressed. And I do understand that one of the further concepts in the plan was that you guys kind of not just reorg, but kind of look through every program you have, whether it's the Chapter 38 or using Chapter 46 or doing DPP rules. So for you as the housing director, how do you feel like with, I mean, that 18,000 goal, you guys are acquiring properties. What do you think the number one challenge you guys have is?
Well, to do affordable housing, it's very complex. And I think Chair Waters already mentioned one of the biggest costs is land. So land, infrastructure, policy, rules, and subsidy, right? Those are usually the mix of what it takes to do affordable housing. Our fund for subsidy is relatively small, right? We collect about 7 or 8 million a year from the Affordable Housing Fund contributions from the real property tax. So infrastructure is very expensive, and that's why we partner with the state on trying to do those projects. I think the greatest impact we can make is in the area that the council has expressed earlier, making our lands available under Chapter 38, and this has been mentioned before. This is a 5 to 7 year process. So that is why Director Tashner is trying to work to amend the ordinance or the laws under Chapter 38.
Yeah.
So making lands available is one, making subsidy available is another, and that's why we're in strong support of Bill 3, trying to provide a grant incentive to what I view as a niche program for the city addressed at more moderate workforce rentals. I think it's a very unique program because the low-income rentals is a program really run by the state, and it's oversubscribed.
Yeah.
So that and our policies and rules, the administrative rules are under the administration's control. I think that's the area that we really need to focus on. Are all our rules really producing housing? And I think we've already went through one of these exercises where we pursued amendments to 2 particular rules. One, lifting the 80% rent so that it is on par with the state and it actually can facilitate the development of rentals at 80% AMI. The other one was eliminating the DTI ratio that was overly restrictive and even more restrictive than the lending institutions.
Right, and it's probably something we shouldn't have even been doing, really, because we're not the lending institution.
Correct.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think, in your report, now that you're speaking on acquisition of land, you're speaking on admin rules, I feel like if the report was organized like that, meaning like going through every single thing we have to fix from admin rules to changes of laws, because I'm reading it a little bit in here, reading it more in your housing report. Do you see any advantage to us trying to do the report district by district? And I'm not saying it's because we want more work, but I just, again, I feel like there's a lot of things that happen in the urban core, which is great. That's where the majority of the population is, but we're always fighting for scraps in the rural areas.
So I think that's a valid concern, and we're happy to announce that we contracted with Community Scale. I think I put out a communication to let you know that we recently contracted with Community Scale LLC. They'll be helping us evaluate and take stock of what do we have right now that in the way of existing housing, what's in the pipeline. That's going to also be, I guess, supplemented with the UHERO database that is already in the works. I believe I sent a link for the beta testing that is going on. So that will give an inventory of all the housing projects that exist now. We are working on the gaps in the information because I noticed that some of the city contributions are missing. Although the project is listed, we're not catching some of our contributions in the way of affordable housing funds, in the way of a Bill 7 project. And I just wanted to also augment some of the comments made on Bill 7. Bill 7 is in its infancy stage. Right after the Bill 7 passed, the rules changed from the Board of Water Supply. So developers had to now redesign a bunch of things to conform to some of the rules that changed on them. Then COVID hit, and then the interest rates doubled. So the developers are smaller developers. They can't just absorb those kind of shocks right away. They're going to take time to adjust to it, and they are now. They're in the pipeline, and that's why Director Apuna is saying, please have faith. Let's give these developers a positive signal that, we want to support their projects in the pipeline. There's at least over 200 units now, between now and the end of the year, that could come online.
So they have to work through all of that. The interest rates was a big shock that could possibly kill some of these projects. So that's why it's very important we get behind this grant incentive that's going to come about on the bill on Wednesday.
Well, I think, one of the things you put in the housing plan was you guys are going to make an affordable housing database. And I've made one for my whole district, so I know exactly where all the affordable housing units are. I know who the managers are. I know how many units are open because we're constantly placing people. So I think that would help us, right? The affordable housing database, which I don't know if anyone's working on that, which it could be good. That will let us know where the gaps are. That will let us know that if we put a project in a certain district, that we don't have transitional housing in that district, or we don't have affordable housing that they can go to from a shelter. So it will help us to address the gaps, I think. So I just have one more question, Chair, if that's okay, for DCS. Thank you, Director. So in reading the affordable housing plan, which has various, maybe 10 pages at the end, where it says homelessness, I really want to emphasize how important it is for us to have a separate homeless plan. We have to, because we're integrating our homeless comments into affordable housing, but to be honest, it's a whole different beast. We are not talking about people that can actually afford $800 to $1,400 to $1,800. That's not even the right bracket. So I think for us to weave in 1/8 of the conversation for homelessness and then say, okay, well, that's part of the affordable housing plan. We have 3 pages. We're not going to get there. So there's a clear goal in the housing plan that says 18,000 units, but there is not a clear homeless goal. There is not a goal of we have about 5,000 homeless on Oahu and we're looking to get it down to 2,000. We have no written goal. So it's important for me to convey this because as we look through where all the money is going, we have to be able to say that there is a decrease of the number. My district had 43% increase in unsheltered homeless. I'm looking through these pages, very little even impacts any of those areas. Very little of what's written here. So that's what I think with Councilmember Cordero saying, how do we address the gaps? How do we analyze it? That's my question. I'm looking at tons and tons of papers, budget items that don't affect my district that had a huge jump because we don't have a specific homeless plan. Is that something that DCS is working on?
So the City and County of Honolulu does have a separate homeless plan. It was communicated through a separate communication, and it is intentional that it is a portion of it because when we realized under the affordable housing plan, it was on a spectrum of, affordable housing was towards the end of that spectrum where homelessness resides. Through a rent and utility relief program, for example, mayors in Washington, D.C. right now advocating for more housing vouchers or more funding so we can fund more housing vouchers. But through our rent and utility relief program, we identified that 75% of the 22,000 households served in that program were qualified for Section 8. That is, they were 50% and below area median income. 45% of that population, or roughly 9,000 households, were eligible at 30% and below area median income. So we are making a lot of strides. We're trying to beef up our program. To give you a matter of perspective, 9,900 people serviced through rent and utility relief, earning less than 30% area median income. My voucher program at Section 8, I can only do about 4,000 of those vouchers, yeah? And it's 4,000 that are already being served that wouldn't be in that 9,900 population. So good luck to the mayor out there, and we hope he comes back with more money on that. But we recognize housing is a challenge, but we do have that separate housing program, homelessness program, and that is those beds of many flavors that you hear Anton talking about, different service facilities to service homeless individuals that come off the street with services and improve their chances of succeeding when placed in housing.
I see your plan on your website. Last comment, and I'll give the time to someone else. I just don't see any clear goals. I see a lot of things like this many houses, this many people. I see you guys have copied and pasted Partners in Care, some of their graphs that came from the point in time count. I see a layout of your office. I think everything you guys do is great. We need to tie that back to outcomes. We need to say, because of all this money we've dumped in, we now see X amount less homeless on the beach or X amount less homeless in our parks. So there has to be this correlation, or else really nobody in our districts think we're doing anything. So if we don't have visual impact, that's where my concern is. And it's because we haven't tied it to specific goals. We're tying it to programs, funds, and numbers, but not goals of decreasing the actual amount of homeless in any district. And maybe the goal needs to be district by district. Maybe we can say, hey, in town, we can do a way more because we have lots more facilities. We can get this number down by half. Maybe in Waina, we can only get it down by 1/3 because we don't have a lot out there. That will help us to reprioritize what housing we need out there, what gaps we need. So it's just a suggestion. I do appreciate all the work you guys do and for listening to me nonstop ask about things for my district. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have Councilmember Say, followed by Council Chair Waters.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. At this point in time, I just wanted to reflect my 3.5 years here. Then I wanted to congratulate and say thank you to the administration for a job well done. If you recall, 3.5 years ago, we were in a state of quandary. We didn't know what was housing. We didn't have an executive director for housing. We had to ask the questions to Director Crucky. But my point today is that the accomplishments that you folks have done, I say thank you. For Ms. Matsubara, Mr.
Just quick, I'm going to just know where Council Chair Waters will be appointed to the Committee on Housing Sustainability and Health.
okay.
Please proceed. Sorry,
Yeah,
Councilmember.
I just wanted to thank Ms. Matsubara for taking the helm, Director Kawano, Ms. Tachler, Mr. Kevin Auger, and Elsa King, who's the newcomer here as part of the team. The first question I had is that today's discussion has been excellent in educating all of us. But nobody talked about how can we generate more revenues for housing. Any thoughts from the administration? I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but we're talking about all of these studies, et cetera, but the resources are not there. So I'm asking, is there any alternatives in generating more revenues for housing?
Well, well, we know for sure that in terms of real property tax, which is our major source of revenue, that can go up. People are still struggling. They're not fully recovered from the pandemic, and so that's not going to be a source of more revenue that we're thinking of. I do believe that we have to take a look at the empty homes tax. We have a vendor that we're negotiating with. I can't talk about it publicly, but it's kind of like at a hold now because they have issue with the city's general terms and conditions, some of the clauses there. So we're working with them. But my understanding is that it's a large global firm that has an interest in doing the study for us. So we're trying to get that squared away so we can move forward.
Okay.
So that's potentially an area. The other thing we're going to have to do as more electric vehicles go on the road, and this is not so much new revenue, but we're going to have to work with the State Department of Transportation to modify the fuel tax, the current fuel tax, because as we move to electric, that revenue is going to decrease significantly, I think. So we're going to have to figure out how do we modify that tax program so that we charge based on usage versus consumption of fuel. So that's going to have to be looked at. I mean, those are some larger items. We can talk about other charges for services, but from what I'm hearing, just listening to the public when we have meetings, is that we overtax, we overcharge, we overtax. That's what I'm hearing from the general public.
Okay.
So,
Director Kawano, one tool that I thought you folks would be trying to address and sharing with the general public and the council was enactment of the tax incremental financing, TIF.
Okay. So the tax incremental financing, to me, is a zero. I would call it a zero-sum game because what happens is that when you set that program up, you define the TIF district, right? That'll issue the bonds tied to the TIF. what happens is that the incremental growth in value in that district results in more property taxes. But instead of payment of property taxes, that that incremental value that drives revenue would be diverted to repay debt, the TIF debt. What happens is that typically, because we have so much in affordable housing that has to be built, we're probably going to build up, and that district will require more city services wherever it is. The city services, police, fire, EMS, and everything else would then be funded, in theory, by people outside of the district. So is that fair? That's the question I have. So the other issue that comes up is, would the developers be able to go through with the development using all the tools that we have now without the TIF? So that's always in the back of the mind. And actually, in prior administrations, there was a treasurer, I think it goes back to maybe 2013. She actually has a white paper on why, TIFs are not good for the city, based on how our tax program works. So that's my feeling on TIFs, and I have major issues. We are, as an administration, we're willing to look at it, but I think whether we look at TIFs, the other thing they talk about is, and I may have the acronym defined wrong, but community facilities districts, which is essentially an assessment, an additional tax to the landowners within a district. Whether we look at, essential government bonds, whether we look at 501c3 financing, all of those tools are available, but I think we have to do the stringent analysis to ensure that it's the best for the public in general.
Okay, no, the reason why I bring this up, Director Kawano, was the fact that, for me, 3.5 years ago, as I came into office, I did support the rail. And the premise of the development of the rail, when it was adopted by our predecessors, stated that a lot of the financing for the operation and maintenance would be from real property tax adjacent to the corridor of the rail. That's where I'm a little worried as far as this type of a discussion, because that's going to be a big hole for future council members and administrations as far as the rail, if we can't develop the adjoining properties with the rail itself. So that's why I thought maybe with the tax incremental financing, that would be one, along with maybe something from the state government as far as helping the county really try to develop their TODs, the plans. Because if not, with all of the competing interests that we have at the county level, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. I see Mr. Auger leaving, but that's okay, because I really wanted to ask the administration this question too. Shouldn't the priority for the future be based upon infrastructure? That's the core. Without new infrastructure or replacement of old infrastructure, it's very difficult to build. So I'm just bringing this issue out because as a council member, I am concerned that I like to see the success of the rail and how it's being operated and maintained. And even 3 years ago, I think I have a very soft voice and nobody listened. I'm still waiting for HART. I'm waiting for HART to put in solar panels on the stations to offset the electrical costs.
Councilmember Say, can we talk about the resolution as it relates to
Yep.
affordable housing? Thank you.
But that, I'm trying to get housing through infrastructure, Madam Chair, though. So that's why I bring it up. Because, it's going to be a big topic of discussion as we move out into the out years. So I just bring this up that thank you very much for your thoughts about the vacant tax that we have outstanding right now. And I hope to see it maybe sometime during the summer as far as the overall discussion. And, being open, I try and consider TIFs just for the rail system. And finally, that's it. Thank you. I'll bring it up when Art comes on board later on.
Okay, thank you. So next we have Council Chair Waters.
Thank you. I really appreciate what Councilmember Say is saying about infrastructure. From the Director of Housing, we talked about land, infrastructure, policy, and then subsidizing affordable housing. So we already talked about land. Let's talk about infrastructure for a second. I do note in the slide deck that we do have money that was appropriated for infrastructure, affordable housing infrastructure, $2 million for the Halava area, $2 million for Iwilei, $2 million for West Oahu. Can somebody speak to the progress of this? It's planning, yeah? Planning for infrastructure improvements to these various areas. I do note that the slide deck also says that they may potentially be lapsed, with the exception of Iwilei.
Thank you for the question, Denise Matsubara, Office of Housing. I'm sorry, Deputy Auger, who presented on it, stepped out. But the reason for the lapse is we could not find the state matching funds on this for the Halava area and West Oahu. The only state matching funds available which had a city nexus to the infrastructure was for Iwilei. I believe the state had set aside $25 million to do infrastructure in that area.
Thank you. With the exception of our wastewater treatment plants, like let's take that off the table. That's money that was a revenue that is set aside through our water bill, basically, to pay for that infrastructure. What else is the city doing as far as money putting in the budget to build infrastructure to help for affordable housing?
I think with the exception of Iwilei, I think part of it is trying to find a nexus in some of the TOD priority areas because that's where the state is concentrated. And I think the goal is to leverage that funding. But the other avenue is the $20 million that's there for infrastructure to support affordable housing. And I think there is discussion now on trying to find a nexus with DHHL in which city infrastructure could be improved to benefit homesteading. So that's the area of activity that we're looking at as well. But I think in the future, I think there just needs to be more dialogue as we approach the budget with respect to infrastructure development because the costs are huge. The infrastructure improvement plan, there's already been a master plan by the state of which the city participated in for the Iwilei district. So hopefully there will be other plans. And there are some activities going on, but we just haven't found the nexus quite yet with the state. And that's an area of opportunity.
I mean, we're talking about its infrastructure. What exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about sewer capacity, water, roads, accessible to areas that are accessible to fire, ambulance? I mean, what exactly are we talking about?
So infrastructure would involve any of those infrastructures that you mentioned, anywhere from roads, water, sewer, in the Iwilei case, electricity, so utility lines. So it could be anything along that way. I would think the major infrastructure needs would be roads, particularly in West Oahu. There was some road widening with Farrington Highway. I think there is a project
that we have out in Eva near Verona, villages, something to do along Fort Barrett maybe. We just have to work, I think, on finding the nexus with the state so that we can coordinate and leverage the funds.
Okay, the last topic is, second to the last topic is that you mentioned land infrastructure policy and subsidizing. So when you say subsidizing, that means we basically put our money where our mouth is, right? Cash to the developer to build more affordable housing. Is that what we're talking about?
So affordable housing generally doesn't get built on its own. Affordable housing takes a subsidy because the revenue generated in terms of rent or sales just don't cover the mortgage. So the city has a small fund. It's the Affordable Housing Fund. A typical affordable unit requires about $150,000 in gap financing through the state, through its rental housing revolving fund, and about $230,000 per unit in private activity bonds. So the magnitude of the funds you need, I think, are beyond what we generate. And to Councilmember Say's point earlier, a lot of these low-income rentals, or even the moderate income rentals at 80% AMI and below, they're exempt from real property tax, and they're also exempt from GET. So we have to do, I think, more to support home ownership projects because they generate real property tax. And the bottom line is that's the American dream. For a lot of our workforce, they want to work up to owning a home. So I think that's one of the things we want to work closer with the state on is more, how do we look at ways to better support home ownership on Oahu?
I agree. A lot of the projects that we've been getting here at the council have been rental projects, though, rather than home ownership. I guess there has to be a balance of both. But let me ask you this, and maybe this is better for Director Kawano, but you know, the council has been working hard along with the administration on approving 201H projects, right? We've also been working hard on TOD projects, although that's been slowing down since rail's not getting to Ala Moana right now. But there was a bunch of TOD projects where in exchange for increased height or density, the developer agrees to build affordable housing. And of course, we have Bill 7 projects. But here's my concern. You know, I'm looking, and maybe this is a good transition to number 2 on our agenda. If, you know, I'm looking at the audit of DDC where it says that the average project time for from budget approval to completed construction on capital improvement projects is 5 years. So all this stuff we're talking about today, right? 5 million here, 35 million there. From today, these projects aren't going to come to fruition until we have a different mayor, right? I mean, I'm assuming Blangiardi is going to get re-elected, but these projects, if they take 5 years to accomplish, how then are you going to meet the goal of 18,000 units if it's going to take 5 years from today?
So that's a tough question, but the development cycle is 5 to 7 years. That's just the development cycle. Bill 7 projects, though, are not. They're half that, right? So that's why we have to support Bill 7. But the reality is that is the development cycle, and a lot of the projects that we see coming online this year, next year, were projects that were in the works several years ago. So that's why in some of our criteria, you've asked about criteria, they want to look at, particularly for the Affordable Housing Fund in this solicitation, is project readiness, right? The leveraging
Do you have your financing secure? Do you have site control? Is your project pretty much ready to go? Can you get the financing done and close, within a short period of time? So that is some of the criteria, and that's the reality of development. So to keep that pipeline going, and this is true of any development at the state, within the nation, that's the development cycle. The biggest thing that we can do, again, is improve our own processes, operate more efficiently, and that's what I think DPP is working on with all the technological enhancements. We have to do a better job at looking at all our resources. Several council members pointed out we're not using our federal resources as we should. Housing trust funds was brought up. That's still an opportunity that we have not explored recently, and we understand DCS has capacity constraints, and I believe they're working on it. We haven't used our housing vouchers for project basing yet. That's another opportunity which DCS is working on. So there's a number of opportunities which Councilmember Tupola rightly pointed out that we need to pursue. So we're going to do that within the capacities that we have, and then we need to identify what is it going to take in terms of capacity, salary, operating funds that we need to get to where we need to go if we want to meet our goals of 2,200 units per year. So those are things that we need to work on. So I'm not sure if you still want DDC to come up. But
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, is that the goal, 2,200 units per year?
That comes up to roughly the 18,000 for the mayor's two terms.
I see. Okay. Well, thank you for your hard work. I really do appreciate what everybody in the room is doing to solve this problem. But I guess the scary part is that I keep looking back at a 2019 DBED study that says we were 25,000 units statewide behind. And unless we start speeding this up, it's only going to get worse. That study is now 5 years old, right?
So there's a new study coming out. DBED already published their 2024. I think it reflects the outmigration that has occurred. SMS is still working on its 2024 study. So we're going to see some of the numbers reflect that.
Do you know what the number is now for Honolulu? How many housing units we need to build as of 2024?
Offhand, I recall a 17 to 18,000 number, but that's over a 10-year period. So just on the surface, it looks like the numbers went down. But the other complication is SMS, who did the 2019 study and did a breakdown by AMI levels, changed their methodology. So I just don't know if you can fairly compare the 2019 study now to the 2024 study, because they're going to subtract out projects in the pipeline. It's a little bit confusing, and they're still working on it. HHFDC is still working on it.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. And can we just ask DPP to stick around for the next portion of the agenda?
They've already been informed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, members, for your questions. And I made this resolution so that we can get an update. It is a good thing to keep following up on, and so I do take that to. I will take note of that. With that, we did testimony, and I would like to move on to the next agenda item. Oh.
If I may just have a point of discussion.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I just want to know, I totally support the conversation about using CDBG for different activities, including supporting nonprofits, supporting, housing. But I just wanted to make sure, because we're all discussing, I know a lot of ideas were thrown out, just that I don't have any concerns with it being used for parks or other types of facilities, understanding that when we're looking at community revitalization, when you're looking at benefiting the intended recipients of CDBG funds, low and moderate income families. I do think there's value in park spaces and recreational spaces. I think as we outlined today, recreation centers, economic development, there's a whole lot of things that go into serving the community. And so I just didn't want to shut off potential uses for it, or wouldn't want to see potential uses be cut off if it fits and it makes sense. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for consideration, especially if you're understanding that CDBG is capped when you're talking about funding going to nonprofits for services. So if we're not being able to fund them on the operation side, I mean, ultimately it would largely go towards maybe acquisitions or other types of activities. And so, and if you're adding that into an already existing stack of financing, you're layering in a whole nother regulatory framework and federal regulations that a project's gonna have to comply with. And so I know that there's a lot of due diligence going on, but just wanted to make it known that I'm not on the side of like, oh, we got to use all of our CDBG for housing, and am comfortable as long as there's meaningful analysis of why it's going to a particular project. So appreciate all the presentations today and everyone that came out.
Okay, thank you. Next, moving forward to item number 2, which is a follow-up on the audit of the Department of Design and Construction's implementation of the city's capital improvement program, which was under Resolution 2022-233. With us, we both have from this Office of the City Auditor, Troy Shimasaki, as well as Haku Milis, Director, Department of Design and Construction. I do see both of them up here, and so maybe if we can have a summary a bit from the city auditors, and then also then bring up Director Milis.
Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairs Cordero, Wire, and committee members. Troy Shimasaki.
Sorry, Troy, sorry, Mr. Shimasaki, I would like to designate Council Chair Waters as a member of the Joint Committee on Budget and Housing, Sustainability, and Health. Okay, go ahead, rock and roll.
Thank you. Again, Troy Shimasaki, Deputy City Auditor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss our audit of the Department of Design and Construction's implementation of the city's capital improvement program. You have the report in front of you, so instead of going over it in detail, I'm going to give you a brief overview of our audit report. So this audit report was issued in November of 2023. This audit was performed pursuant to Resolution 22-233, which was adopted by the City Council in 2022, November of 2022. We had 3 primary audit objectives. The first was to determine whether the city's implementation of the CIP program, as overseen by the Department of Design and Construction, is operating effectively. Second, to identify potential barriers that may contribute to delays in project implementation. And third, to provide audit recommendations. We had 3 primary findings in our audit report. The first is that DDC does not centrally monitor or prioritize ongoing capital improvement projects, leading to project delays and unmet performance goals. Second, department staff do not consistently adhere to standard operating procedures, which contribute to delays in construction. And third, due to department vacancies and increasing retirements in key management positions, CIP projects are backlogged and exceed project manager capabilities. Our audit offered 6 recommendations to DDC to improve their CIP program. Thank you again for the opportunity to present our audit findings. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, members, are there any questions for the city auditor? I would like to lead with a few, just in case I don't get to at the end. First, I was wondering if you could please explain or elaborate on the criteria and methodology used to select the samples of projects for the audit, particularly the choice of the 12 projects you reviewed out of the 352 projects that are in DDC.
Yes, thank you for the question. So intent of our audit team was to get a broad perspective of different types of capital improvement projects. Those include those that were adopted by the city council and different agencies throughout the city. So that was the purpose of that methodology, so as we don't concentrate on any particular department or source for a capital improvement project.
We can repeat your last sentence again. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to jog my memory. So the purpose was to make sure that we didn't concentrate all of our sample selections on any particular department or a city council member request or city council request. We wanted to get as broad a perspective of CIP projects as possible.
Okay, understood. How does the Office of the City Auditor plan to incorporate the Department of Design and Construction's feedback and suggestions for conducting more comprehensive audit of the city's CIP processes in future audits?
Yes, thank you. So we do have a comment in our audit report that recognizes that a great deal of what goes on with DDC in administering their CIP project includes a lot of other departments and sometimes entities out of their control. And we are considering doing another audit that maybe is separate from DDC, but looking at the CIP process as a whole, or at least in part, that is separate from DDC. But yes, that is under consideration.
Okay, you asked my last question, so I'll go to my second last question. When will you provide an update status of the recommendations to
Yeah,
DDC?
so our office generally does an update, a follow-up on audit report recommendations every 3 years. So this one, because it was issued in 2023, would be eligible for a follow-up review in 2026.
Thank you. Okay, members, any questions for the auditor? We have Councilmember Tupola.
Thank you so much, Chair. Aloha, thank you for being with us. So just to follow up on the sample size, because you guys had chose 12 and there was about 352 projects, I just really feel like the sample size is way too small. I mean, is there a level of, so for any type of data that you're doing, whether it's statistical, we're doing qualitative, quantitative, there has to be a threshold that makes the findings like valid. So how did you come up with that 12 was going to be enough of a sample size out of 352?
So again, we tried to get a broad perspective of types of capital improvement projects. And we didn't do a statistically valid sample in this case, and we didn't proffer up that our audit findings were representative of the entirety of DDC's CIP projects. We just identified issues potentially with the different types of projects. So it depends on the audit team, and what the audit objectives are will determine the sample size. And in this particular case, our office determined that a smaller sample size that showed a more diverse sample of projects rather than a statistically valid sample was appropriate for this particular project.
Yeah, it's kind of concerning to me because I do think that having a valid sample size, honestly, for anything is very, very important. Mm-hmm. And I think because we're microscopically looking at the department, it then broadens that microscopic view to then be put on all of it, which doesn't help us very much because then we don't really know. And so I get it that you guys have limited resources. I read that throughout this report. And I think the next question I have is on these recommendations. To me, the 6 recommendations are very broad, not very specific. So when it says provide additional information on ongoing quarterly CIP reports issued to City Council that includes more details. So this is saying a frequency, right? So ongoing quarterly. That's good. I think that's something awesome. The next thing says, amend the change order process to track or monitor the progress, set realistic timelines and expectations. And as well, the next one says, establish better communication. So one of the things in any audit you want to do is you want to establish a specific suggestion and not a broad one. So to say to amend the change order process, I think in order for them to do a better job and for us to kind of track it, it really should say exactly how. Are you suggesting to amend the change order process by adding additional checks and balances? Or are you suggesting that they amend the change order process to have a further oversight? And that was one of these, right, is to have a better oversight. That needs to be suggested to us more clearly. Are you suggesting that we hire an additional person or that the office of, the auditor get involved? Whenever like one of them says, develop strategies for expediting the project closeout process. What exactly would the strategy be? The closeout, are we suggesting that for them to close out, they would need at least 10 checks that would make sure that the project is closed out? Are we suggesting the timelines be 5 days as opposed to 20 days? So I'm just saying, if you guys want to take a smaller sample size, which is your purview, the 12, and you're going to go microscopically, then in each point, you're going to have to go much more detailed. Because I would say a broad audit would be if you took all 352. A narrow audit, which is the way you chose to go, needs to have narrow prescriptions and recommendations. This is important for me because I've mentioned this to the city auditor, that when these come out, we should be able to take the audit and then apply it to a change in admin rules, apply it to a law change, fund a particular position that's missing. Because after the audit is done, we want to be able to take action. And I think as well, the department wants to take action, but we can't take action if everything is very, very broad. So I'm looking forward to, you said you guys are going to do a follow-up audit?
Possibly, we are considering that.
Yeah, and I do think that there's a lot of good audits that you guys can, maybe look at. The state audits are much more thorough and in-depth on the recommendations. I think no matter how you decided to do your study, which is up to you, that's one thing. But when you come out with your recommendations, that is the key part of the audit. That's the one I look for. I'm looking for exactly what they're saying. Jan Yamana used to be our auditor at the state, and she did stellar work. I would recommend maybe reading through some of those because the recommendation pages are vast. It usually recommends like various leases be changed, various personnel be changed, orders be changed. So anything more to give us the tools to create that change, we would gladly appreciate that.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. I'll take that back to the city auditor. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, any other questions for the Deputy City Auditor? Okay, we have Council Chair Waters.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Did you discuss, basically, I read your your introduction saying that these projects take on average 5 years, but did you take into account that part of the delay was caused by things out of DDC's control? For example, during this construction phase, the contractors have to get a building permit. And as we know, that process, getting a building permit, takes a while. Did you consider that?
We did, and again, given the limitations of time and resources that we had, we focused this particular audit on what DDC control and purview was, and that's why we added that condition and had a discussion about, yes, we recognize that there are entities and organizations that are outside of DDC's control that contribute to overall delays, but because this particular audit was focused on DDC, we did focus as much as we could on what they could do. Now, similarly, we issued a report on DHR, as you may recall, but they had a similar issue with sometimes the agencies themselves can take a while in order to produce what they need to do in order for DHR to do their work. But in that audit, we also looked only exclusively at DHR and what they could control, but acknowledged that there are entities outside of their control. So again, to answer your question clearly, yes, we did recognize that, but no, we did not look at that in this particular audit, but we are considering an additional audit to look at the capital improvement projects that go beyond DDC.
Because again, I'm reading, I think it's one of the first pages, page 2 of your audit, and it says that the average project time from budget approval to completed construction was almost 5 years, which makes it sound horrible. But if it takes 2 years to get a permit from DPP, and then when it's in construction, and you got to wait for the contractor to do their job, You know, it seems like it's kind of unfair to DDC that we're almost like you're blaming them when some of these things are outside of their control. They have to prepare for the RFP. That's Corporation Counsel, right? That has to do that. And how long does that take?
That can vary. I think we pointed out in the audit report that, you know, the time it takes can vary depending on the complexity of the project. That does contribute to the overall time. You are correct.
So, you know, back to what Councilmember Tupola is talking about, like meaningful recommendations, like, that's why I wanted DPP to be here. As an example, why doesn't design and construction get put to the front of the line at DPP instead of having to wait like everybody else? To me, that would have been a really, really good recommendation, right? Maybe we need more attorneys looking through this RFP so that that can be sped up. You know, that to me would have been a good recommendation, right? I mean,
well, I guess to answer that particular question, because we didn't examine DPP's role in the capital improvement pipeline, it would have been unlikely that we would have made a recommendation to them. But like I said, if we do a follow-up, we can certainly consider, you know, looking at all of the agencies that contribute to capital improvement projects and see where some of these log jams are similar to what we did with DHR. And I would say similar to the DHR audit is that sometimes we're looking for an agency to just kind of step up and take control of the entire process. So for example, with DHR, you know, they were kind of the agency that, not to minimize what they do, but kind of do the paperwork for personnel. They manage, you know, hiring, they do the position descriptions, and they wait for departments themselves to come to them and ask for assistance and get things going, versus we had almost tasked them with, why don't you be the ones to kind of look at personnel management for the city as a whole? I know that's not your role or your job now, but perhaps somebody needs to, because right now it seems so piecemealed in a lot of what city agencies do, and I think that may be the case with DDC, not to necessarily add to their responsibilities, but maybe somebody needs to look at the entire capital improvement process from beginning to end and really take control of wanting to make those changes rather than each department in their siloed processes kind of do their own thing, and one of the other agencies has to wait till the other one is finished. So a comprehensive audit, perhaps of looking at the entire capital improvement process, might address exactly what you're saying.
yeah, I appreciate that. But you heard the previous discussion when we're talking about building affordable housing. So if it takes 5 years, what I'm interested in is how we can reduce that amount of time so that we can build affordable housing and other projects quicker. You know, I do appreciate the fact that you pointed out in your audit there needs to be more central monitoring. You know, that staff needs to follow their own policy, and that certainly we're dealing with this across the entire city with vacancies. But that's what I would be looking at, is how we can make the process more efficient so that it's quicker. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any other questions for the Deputy City Auditor? Okay, Councilmember Tupola.
I'll make it short, Chair. I just wanted to say on the prior OCA audits on page 10, so something important to follow up with Chair Waters is that whenever we have prior audits, what you guys need to do in this report is you need to write which recommendations were followed and which ones were not. So in here, you guys said that the audit from Resolution 1991 adopted had 9 recommendations. And then you guys went on to report number 1503. The audit made 14 recommendations. So in order for us to know that the recommendations previously issued were followed, or they are different or the same than the ones you guys are making, that helps us to know whether or not this has been suggested multiple times. That will help us to know whether this is actually broken or whether it's fixable. Because in all three audits, if it's suggesting similar things, then you draw those ones into your recommendations and say, based upon 3 previous similar recommendations, we feel that either 1, a bridge should be created between DDC and DPP, or 2, DDC should be merged into DPR, or whatever it is. Those should lead you guys to a better conclusion that will then have more of a longitudinal recommendation. Is that something you guys could work on maybe the next time you do an audit?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any other questions for the Deputy City Auditor? Okay, moving forward to the Director of the Department of Design and Construction, Hakumilis.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Haku Millis, Director for the Department of Design and Construction. I want to kind of start by saying I really sympathize with the Office of the City Auditor. Our process is very difficult, and so I can imagine it's very difficult for them to come in, try to understand the procurement process, our construction processes, everything that we have to deal with, try to put together an auditing plan, and then go through their whole process and then make recommendations for that. And so, I'm sympathetic to the difficult position that they're in. And we worked with them the best we could. We provided everything that we could to them that was asked. We did have some questions and some things that seemed inconsistent in the end. But I've had some conversations with each of you and looking to discuss more of the recommendations that came out of it. We did take them to heart, and we are working on specific things. The first one I want to kind of ask you guys, each of you received the quarterly reports, the bubble chart that Director Kozlov had kind of initiated with the red, yellow, green. Excuse me. And so, they mentioned providing more information on that chart. If there are specifics that you guys would like us to add, we're happy to make that accommodation. We usually don't get a lot of questions. We sometimes do. I go into some offices and I see it up on the wall, so I know you guys are looking at it. But if you have feedback or questions, specific things, we're happy to make adjustments to better fit what you guys, the information that you guys need. The second recommendation was, track and monitor the progress to set realistic timelines for change orders. We looked back at our processes, and not just for change orders, and some of them are a little bit older, and so the days that are allotted at each step might not be realistic for our current workloads and everything else that each department has going on. As you guys can see in front of you, our processes go through various departments, multiple approvals through each department. And so, the days that we are allotting for those approvals don't necessarily fit or are not accurate. So one of those processes we've discussed with BFS, with the BFS director, and they're going to be working to provide a more realistic timeline so that expectations across the board hopefully can be tracked and met. So we'll be working through that as well. One of the questions from the city auditor for our change orders was that they wanted to put it on our staff to track down where the change order is sitting in terms of approval. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we can make that commitment to try to track down every single change order for every construction project that we have to try to make sure that it's pushed through, in a day or two. Other departments, other agencies, other department heads have their own priorities. When something becomes a rush or a priority issue, then it's brought to their attention. But we have to respect their time and where our work fits in with their schedule. In regards to establishing used by the city and the public. What I need our project managers to focus on are the active and ongoing projects. If I had them stop work on active projects so that they could do documentation on closeout, it would create a longer construction and design time on active projects that I know need to be the priority for the entire city as well as council, especially the projects that are initiated here at council. Staffing and succession planning, that's something that I push with my staff on a regular basis. We have developed succession planning, succession plans for each division, looking at opportunities for education and our younger staff, pushing them to take on more, take advantage of TA opportunities. And so, you know, that's something that we have been focused on. We do have a lot of opportunities for retirements. That's something that every department, I believe, is dealing with. And so we're prepping the best we can for when those come up. Reducing staff vacancies, you know, this is one clear-cut recommendation that we would love to work towards. We work closely with DHR and we push hard for hiring. Some of their new initiatives like same-day hiring has really helped us. We'll continue to take advantage of that. And with DHR working with the engineering departments and the administration on, you know, potential increases in pay for engineers this next fiscal year. That's something that I believe is in the budget, but the details have not been shared yet. So we're hopeful on this. I'm encouraged with what we have planned. And that's kind of my summary of these recommendations. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Millis. I do have one question. You just mentioned in a response to the closeout and timeliness relating to documentation and the expending of more time on that. Are you looking at steps to reduce the paperwork or response so that you are able to, I guess, avoid, maybe not avoid, but I guess just reduce the time?
Thank you for the question. So we are working with other departments, particularly BFS, on forms and processes that can be removed or reduced. There are some forms in the closeout process that we believe can eventually be removed, but it's not as easy as just saying, don't do this anymore. So that's one of the ways we're trying to reduce the closeout time and procedures. It is something that was tracked in the past, closeout of projects. Again, because I've decided this is not a priority right now for us, it's not something that we're focusing on. But hopefully when we get back to full staff, closeout of projects within a reasonable amount of time is something that happens on a regular basis.
Great, thank you. Members, any questions for Director Millis? Okay, we have co-committee chair Wire, followed by Councilmember Tupola.
Thank you, Chair. Mahalo, Director, for being here. I just wanted to pose, I guess, a question. We only had one piece of written testimony, and she'd asked this question. And so I was, please ask the city why reconstructed roadways and not last more than 10 years. So I guess just to broaden that, could you just share a little bit about the process and you know, the material maybe used and the lifespan and any info that you think could be helpful to explain to the public how this process works?
Thank you for the question. So typically our road paving design is, you know, it's designed to last 20 to 25 years. That's assuming we get good maintenance and we don't have any significant problems. For this particular question, Honolulu Home Road that was brought up, that was paved, I think around 10 years ago. But that project still has punch list items. So there are things that needs to be corrected. on that project. I didn't get the specifics. But going back to, how long roads last and the city process, so we'll go through and we'll do a full reconstruction, like King Street, for example, right? King Street, we're working through paving. It should be paved this year. It was last fully paved in 2002. And so some of you remember the condition of King Street before we started paving it. Just because we don't pave it in 20 years doesn't mean the condition is perfect for 20 years, right? We have to do continuous maintenance on it, and that responsibility lies with DFM. We work very closely with them to decide which roads need to be repaved and which ones they're going to work through maintenance. There are opportunities for them to seal cracks and get more years, or to remove like the top 2 inches, put back the top 2 inches. They can repave on top of the roadway and buy another year or two. It really just, it depends. Each road is different, is subject to different traffic loading, and how often, King Street is a pretty busy road, but smaller roads, residential roads, they don't get big trucks, they get less cars. So all of those things have an effect, an impact when roads need to be repaved.
Appreciate that, Mahalo.
Councilmember Tupola.
Aloha, Director. So based upon anything that was recommended from the auditor, what will you be doing, if anything, different?
Thank you for the question. I think it gave us opportunity to look at the bubble chart. Are there, aside from me asking you guys today and in private conversations, how can we be better at conveying information to council, particularly for council added projects? I think part of the I think part of the frustration comes from council added projects in the past is not something that had immediately been worked on by our department, and so it would take some time before they would be initiated and the DDC would be allowed to work on them. And so I think that kind of created some issues and partially contributed to the audit. But it doesn't change that we can always improve the way that we provide information. And if something's missing that you guys need to see and would like to be included, we can work to provide that. Yeah, I don't know that it's different. Staffing and succession planning has been a priority for me since I became director. Kind of the mentality that we've had, I feel like internally and with my deputy is that, we're in a very tough transition of somebody retires and then somebody's ready to step up and then you kind of fill in. Some of our branches are like that, but a lot of our sections are missing key people. A lot of our divisions are missing key people so that we can't just fill in the ladder when somebody leaves. And so we've worked hard. Our previous ASO started up the succession plan document that we had all of our divisions work through. We've worked closely with them. And so, not that it would have been necessarily different, but I'm glad that they highlighted it. It is a priority for us to work through that succession planning and hiring, it's across the board for the whole administration has been a priority. And we just appreciate the work that DHR has done to support us and get creative on bringing people in.
So it sounds like you have your staffing vacancy issues, you have the workflow issues, and then you have communication issues, meaning your ability to communicate with us, the public, or others that might need to know where the project is at. Do you feel that you guys are trying to do too much with too few people?
Thank you for the question. I don't necessarily think we have complete issues with everything. I think there are definitely opportunities for improvement. And we look to the departments to tell us what they need, right? We look to council to let us know how we can improve, you know, the auditor going through the processes and identifying, you know, maybe it's not explicitly said in recommendations, but, you know, what went wrong with this project, or why did this one go so long, or what happened with the change orders, and those kinds of things. And even though it doesn't have an impact to change an entire policy, it's good to be aware of those things. And so going back to your question, trying to do too much with too little, we are, you know, I've said it, you guys are probably tired of hearing it. We're understaffed. We need engineers. Hopefully with this initiative by DHR administration, we start to get some more applicants. But, you know, we have positions where we're on round 11. We've gone out, we've gotten a list, and we've tried to hire 11 times for these positions, and we haven't hired anyone. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult process.
No, I appreciate you being candid about it. And I'm saying that because I think sometimes, especially within the city, we take on so much and we just can't. And so every day I try to work with my staff on what do we start and what do we stop? Because we have to stop a bunch of things because we're spread too thin, right? The more we try to help, the less helpful we become when we're in 20 different areas when we should be in 2 areas. And so I think as you progress forward, especially with the, you know, the trials that you're having with engineering, like I think we have to take a serious look at how we can become more effective, because we also don't want that burnout to happen within your own department, because it does feel daunting to have so many projects and not be able to finish it because maybe there's lack of personnel, there's lack of policies. So I do think that that was kind of one of the bigger recommendations that I thought would come out of this audit, is whether or not DDC needs to be housed in another agency, or partnering better with DDC, or maybe like have more help with DFM, whatever would be more effective so that you guys would have the bridge that you need to get done what you need to do. I think seeing as though you have the gaps, our only option is to fill it, which you've been trying to do, or to bridge it. So I think bridging the gap is our next option, and that's what we have to look into, is not, okay, we'll keep trying to fill it. We already have to bridge it. We're almost at triage already, where we're bleeding out. So if we're bleeding out, then what are the bigger suggestions? You guys do projects for what? DPR? Not every agency though, right? Not DFM.
Thank you for saying that, and thank you for the question. We do projects for DFM, so they are responsible for the roads, as well as, you know, the drainage, the channels, the flood and drainage projects that we have going on. It's a lot of different departments: enterprise services, parks, HPD, HFD, medical examiner, HESD.
It's quite a lot. I'm just saying, like, that would have been a really helpful suggestion, was which departments are easier to work with because they might have in-house engineers that can kind of, you know, step in. Like I know DFM sometimes, if it's not a high-level CIP, they can step in and try to get their engineers to help you execute the project. Maybe in other departments, it's just impossible. And maybe it's that DDC should service less departments so that they can actually become specialists in what those departments need. I mean, just a thought.
Thank you for that recommendation. So one of the things that we have been able to do with Department of Parks and Rec is they have an MSS arm where they're able to take on some projects.
They're wonderful.
Right, and so it's been great to have them kind of take some of the smaller projects off of our plate. You know, I think it would be difficult for other departments to find engineers and house engineers inside their department. For one, we can't find engineers as it is, but
I mean, they would have to
workload-wise.
contract out projects is what I mean.
Right, and so what I was getting to is, you know, even though we're short, we have asked administration to put in money so that we can subsidize through, or not subsidize, supplement through staff augmentation, so that we can still be able to get projects out. We do need to use outside consultants to provide that support, but at least we're still able to get some of the work done. You know?
Thank you. Thank you for your diligence. Thanks for being here today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Were there any other questions from the committee? Also noting that Council Chair Waters will be assigned to the committee for quorum purposes. Thank you. See no other Chair Waters question, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today. For the community and members' information, I did meet with the director and we went through the audit. And as I was mentioning, some of the things that increase the delay are outside of your control. But let me ask you this. You've mentioned a few things that you're already working on to make the process more efficient, but is there anything else that you can share with the committee on the things that you're doing to make the process more efficient?
Yes, I think a lot of what I already described is what we've been focusing on. I think interdepartmental communication and collaboration has been important. I'm more than happy to take suggestions and evaluate how we can implement new ideas. And so, if you have now, we're happy for you to send them to us.
I met with the director of HR, who is here, and she explained to me the collective bargaining process, and it's in my mind, it's almost set up to fail as far as being able to fill these hard to fill positions. But can you share with us what else we can do to fill these hard to fill positions? Like you said, these engineers who, quite frankly, they're not going to come to work for the city when they can make a lot more money in the private sector, right? I mean, you yourself probably could be making tens of thousands of dollars more in the private sector. So how do we solve that problem?
I truly believe there are engineers out there that want to come and serve the city. I think it has to be, there's a threshold, right? They're willing to have a reduced pay than what they would make on the private side. One, for a better work-life balance that we have at the city. But two, because you really are contributing to your own community, right? I mean, that's why we are here serving. And so, I think, we've had applicants, we've had people come in, and we're ready to offer them a job, and we tell them what the salary is, and it's like, I can't sustain my life with that salary, right? Which is unfortunate, but there are still engineers who want to come work at the city, I believe, and part of what I believe the city needs to do is collaborate more with, College of Engineering at UH and the colleges here, as well as, it needs to be kind of a cultural thing. In high schools, we started doing the, I don't remember what it's called, but a program for the high school kids to do they spend a day with us, right? The shadow program. Those kinds of things not only give them an opportunity to see what city government does, but specialize in, which department. And so, for the both days that we've had, I've offered and been happy to participate both times. And so, it's important for those kids to see, that engineering is a career opportunity. Just my personal story, I didn't know what an engineer was when I went to college. And I was guided through an advisor because I liked math and science and kind of found it in that way. And so, those kinds of things need to happen at an earlier age, maybe. Hopefully the shadow program is one of those ways.
Interestingly, I had lunch with my counterpart, former chair Fukumoto from Edogawa last week, along with the Consul General of Japan, and I asked them, do you have the similar problem in Japan, in Edogawa? He said, no. not at all. They don't have any vacancies. In fact, these jobs are really, really sought after to work for the city of Edogawa. But one of the things he did say was exactly what you're saying, that they attract employees who want to make a difference in their community. And I think that that's great. But at the same time, like you said, if you can't pay your bills, right, then you know, just as much as you want to do this job, you simply can't do the job. So that's difficult. But, you know, not sure if our friends at HGA are listening, but, you know, do you think maybe we should privatize some of this work? I mean, you kind of already are, right, with the consultants that we hire, but you know, I'm just trying to get creative and think out of the box. How can we be better?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think what would be great is being able to house all of the engineers that would be able to do all of the designs for the city, right? That's right now, to think about what that would take, it seems unrealistic. The amount of money that we spend just for consultants to get all of the projects done every year, it's hard to imagine how many engineers we would need to find and hire to accomplish that. So yeah, I don't know. It's a very difficult problem to solve.
Just we want to lastly talk about affordable housing. You know, perhaps one of the incentives to attract people to work for the city is if we could build places for them to live. So just trying to plant an idea, you know, that we have a shortage across the board, 3,000 vacancies, right? And your department has their share of that as well. But police officers, right? Over 400 vacant uniformed, badge-wearing police officers. So if we could build housing for city employees, you know, as an incentive, right? Perhaps that we could work together to figure out how to do that, you know, because if we could control what they have to pay for their housing, you know, it might be that further incentive. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. I would absolutely support that. One of the things that I kind of remembered is that one of my staff reminded me of the government program, the federal government program, that they will pay your student loan balance after you serve your local government, state government, federal government for 10 years. And so it wasn't something that I was aware of. And so we've been pushing it more, and it seems like, you know, I think something will work more with DHR so that people are aware of this program. You know, if not that I should know everything, but as a department head, I didn't know. There are probably other departments who aren't aware of this program. So we've been putting it out at the town halls, especially, and talking with our comms team about it and DHR. So we just need to make sure people understand, hey, come work for the city, and in 10 years, they'll wipe out your student loan.
Thank you. Members, we also have members, other members from the administration. We have, as mentioned by Director Millis, we have Director Miyazaki as well as Director Takuchi Apuna with us. And if anyone has any questions, I do have a question for DPP relating to some of the discussions by Council Chair Waters. Director, I was wondering about the initiatives that DPP is looking to collaborate with not just DDC, but also other city departments to address the delays in obtaining permits and streamlining the permit application processes for city agencies.
Thank you, Chair, for that question. So we generally do prioritize three types of projects. That's affordable housing, solar, and city projects. So if we're aware that there's a city project that needs to be expedited, we take that information and we let staff know that it needs to go to the top of the pile. You all know that we have backlogs, and so that top of the pile, the line is kind of going this way rather than that way. But so that's one thing that we try to do to help out our city agencies. A lot of the streamlining technology processes, et cetera, will also help to get these projects going. I know there's a lot of different projects that in the future, when we set up all this technology, that we want to have separate lanes that can more specifically focus on certain types of projects. So I think that all of those things will help. But again, when we see a city project, when we're made aware of it, we put it at the top of the pile.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions for any other city administration directors? Once again, we have Director Miyazaki and yeah. Nope, okay. All right. Members, any other questions for Director Millis? Director Millis, do you have any other last comments? We can also go back to discussion after testimony, but Director Millis?
I don't have any comments. I just want to thank you for the discussion today. Really appreciate your time in the Office of the City Auditor, so thank you.
Thank you. And Deputy City Auditor Shimasaki, do you have any comments before I go to testimony?
Thank you. No further comments, but also appreciate the department for their responses and their cooperation with our audit and their willingness to take some of our recommendations under advisement. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we will proceed with remote testifiers. We don't have any registered testifiers, but is there anyone else online who wishes to testify? I see that Angela Young has her hand raised. Okay.
Aloha, can you hear me?
Please proceed.
Hello? Oh, okay.
Make it quick, Angela.
Yes, I was just going to testify to just say that I don't know what the work is like at the city, if the work environment is happy, if people are satisfied with their job and their careers, if it's demanding, if it's chaotic. But I think people like to have a career that is fun with people who care about community matters. And so if there are a lot of vacancies, there must be some kind of reasoning for that, right? So just to say, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, all right, bye.
Is there anyone else online who wishes to testify? Seeing none, we'll move to in-person testifiers. There's no one registered. Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? Seeing none. Okay, members, we're back in discussion. Wait, don't leave the well. I need quorum to continue the meeting, unless I'm going to be here a long time to wait for quorum. Okay, we are now back in discussion. Members, any last comments? Any discussion? I do think that it was really great information to try to continue CIP processes, discussions with the city auditor and looking at that process. With that, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.